Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku has the robot Quirk became the Ex Machina. Here is short summary. Deku is a robot, and Katsuki will prove it no matter the cost. Drabble series. No robots were harmed in the production of this work of fiction. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Extras mingled about the school entrance like drooling, knuckle-dragging chimpanzees, gawking up at the green-haired silhouette standing at the roof's edge. Katsuki watched from further away and glowered at the backs of everyone's heads. "Don't do it," one kid called up jokingly. "You have so much to live for." "Do a flip," another urged. Katsuki sneered at them. They pointed and shouted without a care in the world, blind to the danger the thing posed to them all. Machines ran their cars, their microwaves, their hospitals, tricking humans into relying on them. It was only a matter of time before they pulled the plug and watched as everyone drowned in their own stupidity. Katsuki growled, popped some nitroglycerin in his hands, and vowed he would never let it happen. He would become the #1 hero and expose Deku for what he really was. A teacher, noticing that the students hadn't scurried off like startled rats, stepped outside and saw the cause of the commotion. "Midoriya, please come down. It's not safe up there." "Understood," Deku called back. Deku jumped. Katsuki snickered as the teacher scrambled out of the way. Phones waved about as each student jockeyed for the best view of their falling classmate. With a thunderous crack and the screech of warped metal, Deku hit the ground in a kneeling pose. Concrete cracked and buckled in a circle around him. The useless extras oohed and awed as Deku stood and dusted himself off. The knee he had landed on refused to straighten all the way. Noticing this, the teacher rushed over and said, "Oh God, Midoriya, would you like me to drive you to the hospital?" "No need," Deku said. "This will be simple to repair." As Deku sat down and pulled back his jeans, Katsuki shouldered his way past the extras. A blade protruded from Deku's finger. He slid it through his skin and peeled it back. Underneath, coils of wires wound around gleaming steel beams. His kneecap, warped into a knot, glistened with a layer of oil. A clear membrane held back bright red fluid, a pale imitation of blood. "See," Katsuki shouted. "Nothing but metal and wires inside." "Duh, it's his quirk." "It's not a quirk. That's the lie made up to trick you all into thinking it's human." "Shut up already, I want to see this." A beam of plasma from another finger seared through the twisted metal like butter. Deku pulled out the lump, popped it in his mouth, swallowed, and welded his leg shut. Moments later, Deku tested his new knee. As everyone crowded around, asking Deku a million questions about his quirk, the teacher reminded them all that class was over and made them disperse. Bakugo sullenly looked back at Deku as the teacher fussed over his formerly broken leg and vowed that, one day, he would make them all see the truth. One day, they would all realize that Deku was a robot. Toshinori grumbled to himself as his buff form vanished in a cloud of steam. The slime villain had slipped through his fingers. Scrawny as he was, Toshinori could still use a phone, and he had a rough idea where to look. The deafening booms led him to his target. The viscous ball of slime with eyes had a teenager in its clutches. The kid flung explosions everywhere as the villain forced itself into his mouth. The heroes on the scene stayed back and managed the crowd. Kamui Woods would light up like kindling, Mount Lady wouldn't fit in the cramped alleyway, and Backdraft had raging fires to keep under control. Toshinori turned away, with a prayer that a more suitable hero would arrive soon. Shouts from the crowd made him look back. Another kid marched past Death Arm's barricade, ignoring the hero's shouts to stay out. The slime villain laughed as the kid walked up to him and punched his gelatinous body. When the kid realized that his punches did nothing to the villain and scraping slime off the victim's mouth only gave a second's reprieve, he stepped back. Toshinori thought he was giving up, but instead, the kid scooped a handful of slime into his mouth. The crowd went deathly silent. The villain gawked at him. Even the victim stopped struggling to give the crazy kid a wide-eyed stare. "You know what?" the villain said. "Fine. If you want a taste that badly, have some more. The villain threw his first victim aside and plunged into the other kid's mouth. Within seconds, the villain had fit himself inside. Toshinori pushed his way to the front of the crowd, stomach clenching with fear, but the kid seemed undisturbed by the villain currently residing in his stomach. Death Arms approached the kid cautiously. You all right, kid? The kid blinked at him. Yes, I am. Thank you for asking. Death Arms held out a thermos. Any chance you could spit out that villain? Tilting his head, the kid said, I'm not physically capable of spitting out anything I swallow. I am only able to digest it. Ha! The villain's muffled voice echoed out of the kid's mouth. I'm immune to stomach acid. I don't have stomach acid. It would melt through my body. Moments later, the villain screamed and bubbled out, shrieking, Fire! Why are you filled with fire, you crazy kid? Death Arms scooped the steaming villain into the thermos and screwed the lid shut. As the hero congratulated the kid, Toshinori smiled to himself. The kid had charged into danger and put himself at risk to save another. He had his successor, one already strong enough to handle his quirk. As Toshinori followed the kid away from the crowd, he grinned at the thought of rubbing his new successor in Night Eye's face. That would show him he wasn't an idiot. One conversation later, Izuku ate a golden hair, and the quirk it carried vanished in a puff of smoke. Toshinori felt his head spinning as he drove up to Dagoba Beach. Izuku had grown 2 inches and some serious biceps overnight. His mother knew about One for All and his wound, and worst of all, he had no idea how to teach his new protege. The thought of teaching at UA in the spring sent a shiver down his spine. Heaps of trash dotted the sand, and nobody walked within reach of the beach's stench. It made the perfect spot to let Izuku unleash One for All. All right, Toshinori said as he held his nose. Try punching that refrigerator over there as hard as you can. Izuku punched. Metal squealed, and the refrigerator soared halfway across the beach. So much for teaching him how to activate his new quirk. Toshinori smiled, thinking that teaching might be easier than he had thought. Nice punch. Doesn't look like we'll have to work on your strength, so let's work on building your character. We're going to clear all the trash on this beach. Understood. Izuku looked around. He walked up to a rusted car missing its front hood and 3 tires. His fingers sprouted serrated claws that gouged a chunk out of the side. Unhinging his jaw, Izuku shoved the entire piece down his throat. Toshinori watched in silent fascination as Izuku ate the entire car. The skin on Izuku's back split apart. A giant shaft, sporting long, spindly arms and thick, stumpy legs, grew behind him. As Izuku walked forward, the new appendages snapped more trash around him and shoved it into his back. Black smoke billowed out Izuku's mouth as plastic and wood burned inside him. The metallic growth behind him grew longer, branched off, and sprouted more arms to gobble up trash. Bits and pieces fell off it as he moved, which the arms scooped up and consumed again. The smoke drew a crowd. People watched and took pictures as Izuku dug through mountains of trash. Within minutes, the police arrived, and Toshinori flashed his agency's card to keep them from hauling Izuku away. News reporters arrived shortly after, and Toshinori put on his best TV face as he spouted off about training the future's heroes. By the time he finished with the interview, Izuku had cleared the beach. All Might gawked at the shambling monstrosity, the size of a city block, that trailed after him. All done. Where should I put this? Izuku asked. Toshinori pointed at the pickup truck they had driven in. I only brought that to take away the trash. Understood. The appendages curled up on themselves like a giant roly-poly. When Izuku rolled it into the truck's bed, both bumpers hit pavement and the tires flew off the axles. Izuku shifted the weight around until the entire mass rested on the flattened truck, and asked, what next? Toshinori told himself Izuku just misunderstood him as he changed into his hero costume. Having banked on the beach cleanup lasting a few months, Toshinori scrambled for other training methods. He settled for the tried-and-true method of wandering aimlessly and hoping to come up with a good idea somewhere. At a busy intersection, he found inspiration in the old woman waiting patiently for a crossing signal. All right, Midoriya, this will be a nice, simple warm-up. See that old lady there? Help her cross the street. Instructions confirmed. Izuku hoisted the elderly woman onto his shoulders. Toshinori cringed at the rough handling, but the woman only seemed intrigued by her new vantage point. While traffic still passed through the intersection, Izuku ran towards the crosswalk and cleared the street in one leap. Concrete buckled beneath the force of his landing, and other pedestrians scrambled out of the way. The woman whooped with delight. Pointing across another street, she shouted, "That way!" Before Toshinori could stop him, Izuku leapt across the other street. Toshinori ran after him, but with only half a lung to work with, he could only watch as Izuku shrank into a green speck down the street. One police car raced by him, sirens blaring, then another. A whole squad of cars barreled down the road after Izuku, and a horde of news vans trailed after them. When Toshinori finally caught up, he found a blockade set up around Izuku. Half a dozen news teams had cameras trained on Izuku. "Put down the old lady and keep your hands in the air," one officer shouted through a megaphone. Izuku tried getting the woman off his shoulders, but between the fact she clung to him and he couldn't lower his hands, he soon abandoned the effort. Unable to comply, Izuku told the officer, "You'll never take me alive." The elderly woman shouted. As she happened to be a voice actor for multiple shonen protagonists, the officers mistook her voice for Izuku's and trained pistols on him. "He's resisting arrest. Take him down." Panicking, Toshinori buffed up mid-stride and raced in front of the officers. After a long conversation with Tsukauchi over the phone, he managed to talk the officers out of arresting Izuku. The old woman grinned ear to ear as she stepped off Izuku's shoulders. I haven't felt that alive since my husband ran off with some skank. If only I was 50 years younger." Izuku looked her up and down. "Indeed, you are alive. Have a nice day." As they looked for the next place Izuku could practice being a hero, Toshinori pointedly ignored the cracked sidewalks in their wake and told himself that Izuku just needed some time to adjust to his new quirk. A little girl sobbed quietly and clutched a teddy bear while her cat stared down at her from a tree branch. All Might, recognizing another basic hero scenario, comforted the little girl and mentally prepared himself for another test of Izuku's heroism. "We need to get that cat down from the tree," All Might told Izuku. "Do not damage the tree, or the cat, or any bystanders, or the street, adjacent buildings, or anything else in the near vicinity. Do not make any noises exceeding 80 decibels or lights bright enough to blind someone. Do not commandeer a military drone, hack into the nearby traffic lights, or eat any power cables. Understand?" Izuku nodded. He stared up at the cat for a solid 5 minutes. All Might felt sweat pouring down his face as he waited for disaster to strike. A delivery man, grunting and sweaty under an overstuffed backpack, ran up to Izuku and asked, "Are you the one that ordered 50 tuna salad sandwiches?" Izuku took the sandwiches, scooped the tuna out of one of them, and shoveled the rest, still wrapped in paper, into his mouth. Tuna in hand, Izuku extended his arm until he could reach the cat. Smelling the tuna, the cat latched onto his arm and scarfed down the treat while Izuku retracted his arm. "Cat acquired," Izuku told All Might. "How did I do?" All Might glanced around the street, expecting to find crumbling infrastructure and squads of police cars. Everyone had vanished, but everything else looked normal. A relieved sigh left him. "Perfect, Midoriya, you did a fine job. At this rate, you'll be ready for the entrance exam in no time." The little girl squealed with joy and gave the cat a crushing hug, much to the cat's displeasure. All Might congratulated himself on a job well done and led Izuku to the next random lesson that caught his eye. In a nearby alleyway, a police officer spoke into his radio. "All units, abort. Midoriya has left the scene without any collateral damage." False alarm. Further down the alley, 12 squad cars, a SWAT team, 2 tanks, 4 police helicopters, 3 K9 squads, a sniper team, 3 ambulances, 2 fire trucks, multiple constructions crews, 5 insurance agents, and every local news van within 10 miles all filed out of the alleyway with disappointed grumbling. Katsuki glowered at the extras around him as he filed into his seat. While he ruminated about how he would crush them all under his feet, show the masses the might of his quirk, and unite them all against the robot menace, Deku plopped into the seat next to him. The seat groaned under its weight. Robots can't be heroes, Deku, Katsuki snarled. I'm not a robot. Oh yeah, Katsuki took in its taller and sturdier frame. Let me guess, you got another one of those overnight growth spurts. It's a part of my quirk. More like an upgrade, Katsuki sneered. Hey, a bespectacled student called down. Please keep it down, you are disturbing everyone else's concentration. Can it? 4 eyes. Deku peered up at him and asked, aren't you also disturbing everyone's concentration? The extra's eyes widened, and he kowtowed to everyone around him. He is absolutely right, you all have my deepest apologies. Katsuki hissed at Deku, I know what you're planning, robot. I'm watching you. Deku blinked at him and asked, how do you know I'm going to replace All Might? As that bombshell went off in Katsuki's head, Present Mike came up to the podium and shouted, hey there, listeners. Can I get a big, hey? Silence filled the auditorium. A buzzing noise came from Deku's chest, and a 3D printed metallic, yeah, popped out its mouth. The robot held it up and asked, is this what you asked for? Present Mike chuckled weakly and said, not quite the volume one wanted, but very nice. I see, I could make more, but it would weaken the integrity of my chassis. No, I don't need any of them. Oh, okay. Izuku chewed up the word with deafening crunches and swallowed. Alright, Present Mike said awkwardly, for those of you that didn't take a pamphlet, here's how this will work. We'll start with the entrance exam, which I hope you all studied for. After that is the practical exam, where you'll fight robots until time runs out. A manic grin spread across Katsuki's face. He leapt out of his seat and shouted, yeah, those robots won't know what hit them. Language. 4 eyes roared, and how dare you interrupt a teacher? So manly, an extra with spiky red hair said, staring at him in awe. He stood and said, what he said. Those robots are going down. As the auditorium devolved into chaos, Present Mike sighed and shouted loud enough to shatter windows 5 blocks away. Once the examinees fell into a stunned silence, tiny drones handed out the exams. Katsuki glared at the robot that plopped an exam next to him, certain that it had sabotaged his test. The thought of taking Deku's crossed his mind, but then he realized that the robots wanted him to steal a test and sabotage Deku's instead. Smugly certain he would outsmart them, Katsuki put pen to paper. To his irritation and everyone else's amazement, Deku finished in 30 seconds. Start, Present Mike shouted. Everyone stared at him in confusion until the sound of footsteps caught their attention. Like a flock of birds, the sound of one taking off had them all running. Iida fired up his engines and sprinted deep into the city, thinking to find more robots the deeper he went. Every robot he passed had its head caved in. Further along, the robots showed no signs of damage, but they remained unmoving all the same. I think there has to be some kind of mistake, Iida shouted, hoping someone would hear. These robots hadn't been turned on. That's where you're wrong, little listener. Hazashi called from half a mile away. Another examinee turned those off. Better hurry if you want some points. Inwardly panicking, Iida sprinted to the far edge of the city, where he saw Izuku backflip over a robot and hit the switch on its head. Izuku looked around and said, all targets neutralized. Awaiting further orders. Iida felt his heart drop. All his practice and training, spurning his brother's offer of a recommendation, all made meaningless by a single student in a couple of minutes. There has to be something I can do, Iida muttered weakly. As if in answer to his prayers, the ground shuddered. Concrete split open, and buildings fell aside as a mechanical behemoth lumbered towards the milling students. Iida backpedaled and said, that's the 0-pointer. We should get out of here. Izuku didn't move. He stared inquisitively at the giant robot and said, there's someone trapped in front of it. Iida froze mid-step. Peering at the rubble, he could just make out a cream-colored blob amidst gray chunks. She'll be fine. This is just a test, after all. The robot raised its foot. Izuku pointed his right hand at the behemoth. His wrist ballooned outward, while the fingers shrank into the opening. A green sphere pulsated inside the hollow barrel. With a high-pitched whine, emerald light burst from the cannon and slammed into the robot. White-hot metal gushed down its back. The 0-pointer shuddered, its lights flickering, and toppled backwards with a deafening crash. Iida gawked at the fallen robot. That was incredible, truly. I am not deserving of being here if these are the standards students at UA are held to. As the dust settled, Nezu spoke through an intercom. He sounded manic, and the occasional giggle punctuated his voice. I have bad news and good news. Bad news, 3 students destroyed all the robots. Well, except in Area C, but no one cares. Good news, we have plenty of experimental models to test. Yes, test. Test to your heart's content. Test after test after test. We'll have so much fun. The rodent's maniacal laughter echoed across the empty buildings. The ground shuddered, the Imperial March played, and battle droids straight out of a Star Wars movie marched out of underground bunkers. As Iida ran for cover from blaster fire, he shouted, "This wasn't on the pamphlet." Power Loader gawked as his prized zero-pointer got a new thermal exhaust port seared through its chest. That color, he said, boric acid. Inko always added it to whatever plasma emissions she made for that striking green color. She called it her signature. Maijima snorted, a waste of boron if you ask me. A student brought in an outside weapon. Aizawa asked. That student is the outside weapon. Some techno-quirk merging mechanical components. Figures she had a kid like that. Maijima scowled down at the student standing amidst his fallen robots. Inko thinks she can still mock me, does she? Well, I'll show her. As he went to turn on more robots, Aizawa stopped him with a band of capture scarf. You're not activating more robots. But why not? They already destroyed them all. Clearly we need to amp up the exam. As much as I am inclined to agree, Nezu said, that wouldn't be fair to the other examinees. Maijima had a crazed grin on his face. Come on, Nezu, don't you want to test them out? Every teacher in the room flinched at the mention of the forbidden word. Aizawa's scarf wrapped around Maijima's mouth a second too late. Nezu's head swiveled in Maijima's direction, and his eyes grew wide and vacant. He twitched and muttered excitedly to himself as he hit the intercom button and sent out a fateful announcement. Another few keystrokes brought out the private projects Maijima had laying around in storage. Those better not kill our students, Maijima, Aizawa hissed as he stared down at the battle droids marching against the fleeing teenagers. Relax, he said once Aizawa removed the gag. They're all programmed with the same combat protocols as the standard bots. I think. Aizawa left Maijima tied up while he ran over to an emergency box and broke the glass with his elbow. He took out the electric tea kettle and a bag of Gold Tips Imperial. Remind me again why this stuff takes 25 minutes to brew. Aizawa asked as he read the instructions. If you have any better ideas, I'm all ears, Midnight said as she tried to pull Nezu away from the panel. The principal flung her over his head and hog-tied her with her own whip. As she writhed on the floor, a ball gag inexplicably appeared in her mouth, and half her clothes fell off. The remaining teachers more sensibly cowered in the corner of the room and prayed to whatever deity they thought might hear them. Aizawa gave a long-suffering sigh and turned on the kettle. Katsuki studied the crumpled wreckage of the zero-pointer. A deep, jagged hole pierced its chest, and its lights flickered feebly. Shitty hair, Katsuki said solemnly, I may have only known you for 5 minutes, but you proved yourself on the battlefield today. I swear your sacrifice won't be in vain. Metal squealed, and a plate shot into the air. Battered, sporting a bloody nose, and still smoking from his nitroglycerin-propelled launch, Hiroshima crawled out of the wreckage with a huge grin on his face. He raised both arms high and shouted, that was manly. Quit standing around and find more robots to punch. Yes, sir. Hiroshima looked around at the smoldering wreckage lining every street. I think they ran out. That's what they want you to think. There's always more robots. Sneaky bastards. On cue, a section of road slid aside, and battle droids marched out. Katsuki smirked. They're bringing out the big guns for me. About time. As Katsuki hurtled towards their formation, the battle droids turned about and opened fire. Katsuki darted through the blaster bolts and tore into their front ranks. Metallic limbs flew, and heads shrieked as Katsuki yanked them off their bodies. Retreat. The droid commander called. Run away. The droids panicked and dropped their weapons. As they ran, Katsuki blasted them apart and Kirishima smashed heads and torsos with his hardened fists. In an alleyway, one droid dragged another to relative safety. The fallen droid's chest smoked from a gaping hole, and its right leg had snapped in two. With a weak cough, the fallen droid said, "Leave me and save yourself, XZ-182. My capacitor's blown out." "No, you can still make it. Just hold on. Tell my kid, cough, that I have positive associations with his existence." The droid's lights winked out. XZ-182 held its fallen companion and shrieked, "No. Come back. You still have your primary directives to carry out." Katsuki hacked his way through a wooden door with the severed head of a droid. Through the broken wood, Katsuki said maniacally, "Here's Johnny." XZ-182 screamed as Katsuki blew it to smithereens. In the smoking aftermath of the battle, a tiny droid, shorter than the rest, stumbled through the wreckage until it found the remains of its designated parental unit. It picked up the droid's lifeless head and pressed it against its own, vowing revenge on the human that had massacred them all. A shadow loomed over the diminutive droid. It froze in terror and slowly looked back. Katsuki let loose a few pops of nitroglycerin and said, "Whoops, looks like I missed one." The teachers stared in open confusion at the robot's disturbingly human-like antics. As one, they all looked at Power Loader. The support teacher shrugged and said, "I was super drunk when I programmed those." Facing down an army of battle droids, Izuku consulted the internet for the best possible method of dealing with clankers. The internet said lightsabers and acrobatics. Seconds later, Izuku grabbed a lightsaber out of his chest and did a double front flip into the middle of the droid army's ranks. Up in the viewing deck, Smentos asked, "Is that a lightsaber?" "What? Inko made one too. I have to see this." Power Loader struggled against the capture scarf pinning his arms to his sides. Aizawa scowled over the electric kettle and said, "You're on timeout for saying the T-word. Come on, please. I'll make sure the robots don't do anything too dangerous. They'll be fine. Now sit down." At that moment, Mineta flew into the window. As Mineta slid down, ogling midnight before he fell off, Aizawa released Power Loader. "Fine, but you better." Maijima leapt to the window and said, "Yes. This is everything I ever wanted." Aizawa sighed and went back to the tea. As Izuku hacked his way through the droids, Iida crashed through their ranks and kicked their heads off. Izuku observed the carnage he made and said, "That appears far more efficient than lightsabers." The droid army, in full disarray, said, "What do we do?" The tactician droid smugly laughed and said, "Fret not, puny droid. I have the perfect plan. It's..." A lightsaber speared the tactician droid from behind. As 15287 held the dying tactician droid, it whispered, "Hit it until it dies." As the tactician gasped and shut off, the droid shouted, "You heard him. Group up and hit it until it dies." The clumps of droids fell like wheat with each swing of the lightsaber, and blasters made for poor melee weapons. As the survivors ran away, a shuddering cough stopped them. 4 lightsabers sprang to life as General Grievous stalked forward. Iida backed away, and Izuku blinked at the new arrival. His mother taught him exactly how to respond. In the voice of an actor 2 centuries dead, Izuku said, "Hello there." From the viewing deck, Maijima shouted, "Yes. It's everything I imagined. Come on, Grievous, I programmed your lines." General Grievous coughed again and said, "Your lightsabers will make a fine addition to my collection." "No," Power Loader shouted. "Wrong line." Izuku cocked his head and said, "General Grievous, you're shorter than I expected." "It's all wrong." As General Grievous spun its blades, Izuku charged up his arm cannon. The shot passed perfectly through the swirling blades and burned a hole through its chest. As Grievous fell, Izuku said, "So uncivilized." "Well, that was anticlimactic," Maijima said. "Good thing I made more." At that moment, dozens of Grievouses swarmed around Izuku. As Izuku charged another shot, some Grievouses stabbed each other, some coughed and fell over, and one lopped off its own head as its lightsabers spun. Maijima shook his head at the fallen Grievous robots and said, "Still have a lot of. I think that's the last of them," Iida said. "Shouldn't we check on that girl you rescued earlier?" Walking over mounds of decapitated robots, Izuku and Iida passed the zero-pointer and searched the rubble. The rocks floating in the air pointed them in the right direction. Almost. UURP. Got it. Ochako's stomach heaved as she pressed her hand against another rock. It wobbled in the air. She edged in frustration as she eyed the final piece, a brick facade 4 stories tall that pinned her legs to the ground. Do you require assistance? Izuku asked. Oh, thank God. Yes, please, let me just. Before Ochako could lighten the wall, Izuku flung it off her. Iida helped her up a little too fast for her stomach's comfort. Oh no, Ochako said as she turned a violent shade of green. A glittering, rainbow-colored torrent gushed out of her as she vomited on the ground. Do you require medical assistance? Izuku asked. No, I'm fine, more vomit cut her off. Most undignified, Iida shouted. Why are you vomiting in the middle of the exam, on UA grounds no less? It's disrespectful to all the other students here, and all those who came before us, not to mention the teachers and whoever has to clean up after you. Ochako glared at him. I can't help it, my quirk. Your quirk is vomiting, Iida asked, examining her closely as she heaved up yet more shimmering vomit. That would explain the unique color. It's just a side effect. Analysis complete, Izuku said. Analysis suggests that you either have quirk-induced nausea or cancer. Saw blades and scalpels sprang up at the end of Izuku's hands. Commencing recommended cancer treatment. Ochako swallowed her next batch of vomit as the blades approached her. I'm fine, please get those away from me. The blades retracted into Izuku's hands. Symptoms have stopped. Treatment successful. Please see a medical professional if remission occurs. Sure. So, what was this about more robots I heard about? I haven't seen any. Iida proudly stuck out his chest. My diligent friend and I have already cleared them out. Really? Ochako asked, pointing behind them. What about those? Schwarzenegger look-alike sporting leather jackets and sunglasses stomped their way through the rubble, shouting one-liners like, "Come with me if you want to live," and "I'll be back," in thick Austrian accents. Several had their faces torn away to reveal chrome skulls and glowing red eyes. Izuku aimed his arm cannon and stopped. Power running low, switching to battery-saving mode. Izuku walked up to a Terminator, grabbed its head, and bit clean through its face. Oil gushed down Izuku's chin as he chewed and swallowed the scrap metal. As the robot staggered back, it shouted, "It's not a Tuma." Ochako took one look at the mauled face of the bitten Terminator and threw up again. Blue blaster fire rained down on Katsuki as he raced into the ranks of super battle droids, holding Kirishima in front of him like a shield. The hardened student soaked up blaster shots with a grin. Once Katsuki broke through their ranks, he blasted Kirishima away, knocking over several dozen droids with the hardened missile. Further back, battle droids riding hover tanks watched the slaughter. Any word from General Grievous? One asked. Grievous number 47 asked us to kill the Jedi, and number 86 said to raise the ray shields, whatever that means. The first droid looked through binoculars at the carnage. That looks like a Jedi to me. Prepare to engage. The tanks rumbled forward, and the guns thrummed as their shots charged up. Katsuki glanced at them and grinned. Open fire. An earth-shaking explosion erupted at Katsuki's feet. Once the dust settled, nothing but scorched earth stood before the hover tanks. We did it, the droid shouted. We actually killed a Jedi. My manufacturer is going to be so proud of me. A shadow passed over the droid. It looked up just in time to see Katsuki's grinning, ash-smeared face bearing down on it. It screamed as Katsuki blew its head off. The droid driving the tank shouted up, "What's going on?" Katsuki grabbed the droid and tossed it over the side. The other tanks, seeing one of their own get hijacked, turned about and aimed. Scratching his head over the controls, Katsuki slammed down on the joystick. The tank lurched forward just as the two on each side opened fire. Both tanks erupted in balls of fire, and screaming droids crawled from the wreckage. Crashing through ranks of droids, Katsuki grabbed Kirishima by the shirt and hauled him inside. Drive. I've got more robots to kill. Kirishima grinned and drove the tank through every obstacle he could find, firing shots with the cannon willy-nilly and shouting, this is the manliest day of my life. In the ruins of a building, Jiro huddled down with several other unfortunate test takers as a horde of T-800 Terminators stalked through the streets. "Mon Amy, this is it," Aoyama said, clutching his stomach. "I'm too gorgeous to die this way." "Relax," Jiro scoffed. "The school's not going to let us die." She pressed a jack to the ground and heard explosions and distant screaming. "I think." An explosion right next to their hideout nearly deafened Jiro. 2 Terminators blew apart in a plasma explosion, and more got gunned down by smaller explosions. A hover tank rumbled by, crashing through another building, and stopped in front of them. Katsuki glared at them from atop his tank. "Get in, losers, we're going robot hunting." "I can't help but notice that there's only a few kinds of robots out there," Vlad King said. "I thought I'd be more impressed." Power Loader scoffed. "Those are just the beta prototypes. The alpha stuff is way too dangerous. I have it locked behind a password that Nezu would never guess." From Nezu's terminal, Alexa said, "Password accepted." "What? How did he know the password was password 1? Aizawa glared at him. "Really? What? It made me add a number." "Unleashing my shitty coworkers," Alexa chirped. Maijima blanched. "No, wait, those aren't ready, put those back." He reached for the console, only for Nezu to suplex him into the floor without leaving his chair. A hole opened in the ground. A robotic duplicate of Aizawa leaned out, squinted up at the cloudy sky, and muttered, "Too bright outside. Where did I put my sleeping bag? I haven't had enough coffee for this." "Everyone's expelled." Aizawa's eye twitched as he examined his robotic self. He turned his icy glare on Maijima, who instinctively dug deeper into the floor. "Maijima-san, care to explain?" From half a mile away, Present Mike cackled at the robot. "That's amazing. He nailed you perfectly." A robotic copy of Hizashi waltzed out and shouted, "Hey, look at me. I'm a hotshot radio host, and I'm going to sing loud enough to wake the dead while Maijima's welding his robots together." Robot Aizawa glowered as Robot Hizashi sang Nickelback at full volume. "Hey," Present Mike squawked, "I do not sound like that. And Nickelback, really?" Robot Sekijiro stomped out and scowled at Robot Aizawa. "This year, my students will beat yours. I better go over to Maijima and demand he give all my students the best gear possible, and before Aizawa gets his. That will show him." As more and more robots marched out, more and more glares turned on Maijima. The support instructor nervously chuckled and said, "One of my students must have snuck in those voice prompts." "Still bound up," Midnight said, "take it easy on him. It's all in good fun, right?" The Midnight duplicate walked out, scantily clad in a bunny-eared playgirl costume and flaunting its well-crafted cleavage. "Yoo-hoo, Maijima honey, where are you? Mommy's feeling needy tonight." The ropes fell away as Midnight stalked over to Power Loader. Sensing his imminent death, Maijima crawled back in a corner and trembled. "Looks like somebody's been a bad boy." Midnight cracked her whip. "You need to be punished." Over in Area C, students cowered in an alleyway as Terminators and battle droids marched past. "What if we surrendered?" Mineta whispered. "Are you crazy? You saw what they did to that other guy." The scaly teen shivered. "I can still hear him screaming." A teacher passed by, and Mineta rushed out. "Aizawa-sensei, there's too many of them. What do we do?" Metallic red eyes glowed balefully at them. Robot Aizawa's capture scarf grabbed Mineta and slammed him through a building. "You're expelled. I think this exam is going well," Iida said as he and Izuku plowed through another shambling group of Terminators. "Our enrollment should be assured." "Speak for yourself," Ochako said as she clutched her stomach. "I'm still feeling nauseous." The ground shuddered. More holes opened, and from them lumbered steel behemoths. A grinning skull face stared down at Iida as machine gun barrels spun in its arms. "I take it back," Iida shouted as he carried Ochako to safety. Rubber bullets chipped the concrete in his wake. "We are highly unprepared for this turn of events." Izuku leapt into the air and came crashing down on the robot's head. The mech's torso crumpled under Izuku's fist. "There are stationary mechs just north of here," Izuku told them. "It appears that we can pilot them." Iida took one look at the swarm of giant robots stamping through the city, some comparable to the zero-pointer, and made a mad dash for the empty mechs. In a clearing surrounded by toppled buildings, 3 mechs hunched over, their boxy black cockpits open and vacant. 2 had black paint jobs and handheld assault rifles, while the third sported pink colors and jagged metal claws on one arm. Ooh, Ochako perked up at the sight of Gurren. I call dibs on the pink one. While Ochako clambered into the pink one, Iida skeptically eyed the beret. Are you sure we will be able to pilot these? Why wouldn't you? The controls are quite simple to understand. Really, I'm glad that whoever designed these had usability in mind designing their interface. Very responsible of them. The moment the hatch of the Gurren closed, it spun in circles violently enough to stir up a dust cloud. Inside, Ochako felt her stomach flip as she wrenched at the joysticks. Quickly losing control over her stomach, Ochako threw up while the Gurren spun, spewing rainbow fluids everywhere. As rainbow sludge dripped out of the hatch, Maijima wailed, "Don't throw up in there. I just put in the upholstery." Meanwhile, Iida frowned in confusion at the perplexing wall of buttons and dials in front of him. He gripped the 2 joysticks and said, "Izuku said this would be simple, and I should trust in my companion. This should be the throttle, right?" When he inched both throttles forward, missiles fired out of the beret's shoulders. As 2 mechs rounded a corner, they both took missiles to the face and fell in smoking heaps. Whoops, maybe this one. A slash Harken grabbed a building, yanking Iida forward. As he fell, he slammed into another mech and crushed it beneath him. I have to get back up. Maybe this button would help. Rocket sprang to life on his legs, plowing the fallen mech forward. He hit 2 more mechs along the way and ground them to scrap. As Iida crashed into a building and brought it down on yet more mechs, Maijima smiled in approval. I'm impressed he knows how to pilot that. We're screwed, Juro said as Kirishima rammed the tank into a giant robot. We are so screwed. The robot grabbed the tank on either side and tore it in half like a plastic bag. Juro and the other students on board tumbled out like fruit snacks. Bakugo launched himself through the air and blew a hole through the robot's torso like a very angry jalapeno wasabi fruit snack. Screw you, I was still using that. Kirishima shouted at the smoldering remains. Guys, Jiro asked. Now what? What do you mean now what? Bakugo asked. He pointed at a throng of giant robots. We fight them, of course. On foot, Shiro asked. We'll be crushed, literally. Jiro plugged her amp into the ground. Thanks to the magic of sound waves and plot convenience, she found a horde of humanoid robots just around the corner, painted in variations of red, white, and blue patterns. Each had guns or swords crossed behind their backs. Sweet, Shiro said. We can use the mechs to destroy the mechs. Bakugo walked up to one and blew it to smithereens. As he went to the next one, Shiro held him back with a roll of tape. What the heck, man? We can use those. Bakugo pressed his face into Shiro's and gave him a deranged, wide-eyed stare. That's what they want you to think. They make things easy at first, then you get complacent, and that's when they get you. Well, it's that or get crushed by giant robots. I think I'll take my chances. Shiro hopped in one, and the hatch slammed shut. Seconds later, every part on the robot vibrated violently. It collapsed into a heap with Shiro still clutching the twin joysticks, head rattling from the vibrations. Bakugo, grinning, gestured to the next and said, Go right ahead, try another. Maybe then you'll see I'm right. You know, I wasn't going to, but now I will, just to prove you wrong. Shiro examined the next one and gave it a cautious tap. Assured of its structural integrity, Shiro hopped in. After it closed, smoke poured out of every crevice of the mech. The hatch flew open, and Shiro staggered out, covered head to toe in soot and missing an eyebrow. Nope, I've had enough. Let's just move on. Shiro took one step before a tremor shook the ground. Off in the distance, a behemoth raised its head over the rooftops and scanned the area. Swallowing nervously, Shiro ran for the largest robot of the bunch, said a quick prayer, and hopped inside. Moments later, it flew apart in a fiery explosion, for once not of Katsuki's doing. Hair splayed back and slightly charred on the front, Shiro stared out from the crumpled heap of his cockpit. He wrapped his tape around another robot and toppled it. Nope, I'm done. Destroy them all. Bakugo grinned. Gladly. Purple Sutherlands darted around the corner, guns blazing. Glory to Britannia, they shouted. Surrender filthy 11s, and we might spare your pathetic lives. Izuku drew a superheated metal blade, its length shimmering with an orange glow. Zipping through gunfire, Izuku slashed through 4 Sutherlands, detonating their fuel reserves. Off to the side, Ochako batted aside 3 lances and slashed their wielders to scraps while she spun, and Iida took out 2 by falling on his back as 2 Sutherlands charged from both sides, impaling themselves on the other's lance. The Lancelot, more imposing than its smaller brethren, drew a shimmering green blade and met Izuku head-on. As their blades clashed, a foot crushed the Lancelot flat. The owner of the foot, a red and black monstrosity with a huge grinning face, took off its shades and batted Izuku aside with them. His mech fell apart as he landed inside a building. Kaminari stared in shock at Izuku as he clambered out of the wreckage. Dude, you can pilot those things. Izuku looked back at the mangled wreckage of his Barai. This one can no longer be piloted. I recommend finding an alternative means of destroying robots. Right. Iida and Ochako both landed inside the building. Ochako groaned as she flopped to the ground and said, I can feel the earth spinning. You seem to be suffering from severe motion sickness, or you have cancer. Preparing surgical equipment. Ochako sprang to her feet. I'm fine. The Gurren tore off the roof and grinned down at them. Ochako swallowed and said, I'm less fine now. Kaminari smirked. Don't worry, I'll send this one packing. 10 million volt highly discriminate shock. In true discriminatory fashion, the electricity spewed homophobic slurs as it shot at the Gurren. However, the electricity curved around and struck Izuku instead. Oops. Izuku audibly hummed as his battery accepted the overloaded power. Charge complete. Returning to high performance mode. Green charged plasma burst through the Gurren's torso, coming out the other side in a spiral shape. Sato glanced up at the collapsing mech and back at the student that put a hole in it and asked, Mind if I come with you guys? What? No, I'll be fine by myself, Kaminari said, his voice slurred. Those robots won't know what hit them. A Terminator dropkicked him from across the room. It had both hands around Kaminari's throat before Izuku sliced it in half with his lightsaber. Panting hard and given a thorough vibe check, Kaminari wizened up and said, on second thought. Is that tea almost done? Present Mike shouted from a mile away. Feels like this test's been going on for 4 weeks. Yeah, hurry up on that, Power Loader chimed in. I think I'm running out of robots. How are you running out of robots? You've got Borg and Cybermen out there. Aren't those the same thing? They're not, you Philistine. One's a cybernetic hive mind that incorporates any organics they run across in Star Trek, and the other is a cybernetic hive mind that incorporates any organics they run across in Doctor Who. Enough, you two, Aizawa snapped. 5 more minutes on the tea. Then we get to clean up this mess. Nezu, having heard that, stopped sending orders to the army of robots at his fingertips and called up the big boys. Off in Test Area C, which lacked a walking weapon of mass destruction or a walking weapon of mass destruction with attitude problems, Kota and Mineta huddled together in a cramped hollow beneath a toppled building with a group of terrified, generic students. Just outside their meager shelter, a swarm of Daleks floated past, shouting, "Exterminate," in tinny voices as they fired lasers at some poor victim. Cybermen stomped past, stopping to peer into the abode as the students all scurried behind rocks before moving on. Dude, are those flying trash cans? I bet we could take those. You bet we could take the battle droids, and look where we ended up, another student snapped, who sported blaster burns on his back. Just shut up and hope we don't get caught. Should we make a break for it? One whispered. Are you kidding? Mineta asked. Last time we tried, this human-looking robot yeeted me into a wall. I'm still picking masonry out of my hair. He pulled a brick out from behind his ear and said, "See." Kota wished he had an animal to talk to. Of course, they all had the sense to flee the area the moment robots from every major franchise opened fire in the streets. A rumble in the ground silenced the students. The earth groaned as the largest opening yet slid open in their mock city. From the gaping abyss, a robotic leviathan, shaped like a bipedal dinosaur, lumbered onto the streets, shattering concrete and shaking the ground with each step. As it loomed over the ruined edifices around it, Mechagodzilla let out an ear-splitting roar that shattered every pane of glass around it. As one wall gave out from the quakes, exposing the students both to the giant robot dinosaur and the assembled armies milling about the streets, Mineta fell to his knees, crying as he wailed, "I want to go home." The Cyberman that threw Mineta half a mile didn't quite have the upper arm strength to oblige his request, but at least it made the effort. "Jet fuel can't melt steel beams," Kaminari said woozily from Izuku's back. Sparks ran along Izuku's body as he fired a laser beam through a battalion of Robocops. "Is he okay?" Ochako asked. "It's his quirk, apparently," Sato said. "He gets stupider as he uses it." "The moon landing was a hoax," Kaminari shouted. Bender Bending Rodriguez leapt out of alley and swung at Iida. Laughing, the robot bent over and said, "Bite my shiny metal ass." "Okay." Izuku chomped a hole in the metal. Bender looked at the damage, said, "My programming isn't designed for this shit," and unscrewed his own head. "The Earth is flat. I don't see it curving underneath our feet, can you?" "Warning. Low battery," Izuku said, looking back at Kaminari. "I estimate I have 2 minutes of run time until Kaminari-san's IQ hits the single digits. COVID isn't real. It's a hoax invented by Bill Gates to put microchips in the vaccines." Ochako shuddered. "If that's what he's saying now, I don't want to know how much stupider he can get." The ground shook. 3 robotic, serpentine heads slithered from the depths of UA, each scanning their surroundings and firing plasma beams at anything that moved. Izuku pinched Kaminari, shocking him into shocking Izuku until he had no charge left. Kaminari dropped to the ground with a dopey grin, giving the sky a thumbs up and mumbling, "Aliens made the pyramids." "I've analyzed the specs of the Mecha Hydra," Izuku said, pointing at the giant robot. "Each head has a distinct computer, and the entire structure is designed to build 2 heads for each one that's destroyed. The only way to disable it is to simultaneously destroy all 3 computers located in different spots in each head." "Excellent work, Midoriya," Iida said. "Did you use your quirk-enhanced senses to deduce all that?" "No, I consulted the internet. Maijima-san made a Facebook post 3 days ago at 2:03 a.m. with full schematics and combat data for this robot." "Even cleverer. Excellent researching. I was right to hold you in such high regard. It will take all my power to fire a shot strong enough to take out all 3 computers. Iida, I need you to keep their attention." "Understood." "Ochako, make me lighter." Holding back her vomit, Ochako tapped him and gave a queasy thumbs up. "And Sato, throw me on my signal, at a 42.6-degree angle, using 5,525.6 newtons of force." What?" Izuku blinked and adjusted his plans. "Just throw me really hard." "Why didn't you say so?" Sato snorted a line of sugar and bulked up. "Okay, here we go." "Wait, I didn't say." Yeet. As Izuku went hurtling through the air, he made some last-second calculations, shot short bursts of plasma from his feet to course correct, and lined up the shot. As Iida raced past, all 3 heads turned to fire at him, giving Izuku a shot at all 3 heads. A brilliant green beam vaporized every head in an instant. A giant mechanical squid stared down at Katsuki with baleful red eyes. "Your species shall be harvested. The cycle must continue." "Yo, shitty hair," Katsuki said. "You're up." Hiroshima pumped a fist and crawled inside a pipe. "This day keeps getting manlier." As Bakugo prepared to light it, an extra touched the pipe and shrank it, making a tighter fit. Another welded the cracks shut, and a third padded it in with mushrooms. "I am the product of the greatest engineers in galactic history," the Reaper said. "Your puny weapon is no match for the might that has toppled interplanetary civilizations since the dawn of time." "Can it, asshole?" Katsuki lit off his largest explosion yet. Hiroshima shot out in a red blur and slammed into the bulbous frame of the Reaper. A high-pitched shriek came from the machine as it toppled to the ground. Katsuki saluted the toppled remains. "You fought valiantly to the end, shitty hair. Your sacrifice will not be in vain." Awase looked at him in disbelief. "You killed him to take down that robot." Katsuki grabbed him by the collar. He gave his life to protect humanity. It's a sacrifice any of us might need to make. Off in the horizon, Mechagodzilla roared its challenge to the heavens. The extras backed away when Katsuki turned towards them. Cowards, all of you. We'd go splat when we hit it, Komori pointed out. Not like there's anyone else with a hardening quirk. Over in Area B, as Tetsutsu wriggled on the ground hog-tied with droids standing guard over him, he shouted, I know I'm missing something super manly right now. Still worth a try, Katsuki muttered. Then he shrugged and said, right, Plan B. You, what's your name? You make things bigger, right? Yes, Kodai said. Katsuki pointed at the giant robot. About that big. Sure. Go ahead then. Kodai blinked in surprise. Wait, you. Well, if anyone else wants to punch the dinosaur robot. Everyone else backed away. Kodai tapped his chest and said, all right, but this'll give you a killer headache afterwards. Mechagodzilla stamped through the streets, feeling a touch of boredom as it sent robots and humans alike feeling for their pitiful existences. Its creator had seen fit to make it intelligent enough to understand the insignificance of the carnage beneath its feet without the means to do something worthwhile. The ground shook beneath its feet, for once of its own making. It turned and saw a giant Katsuki stamping towards it. Finally, a worthy foe, it shouted. Our battle will be legendary. When Katsuki punched at it, Mechagodzilla raised its own arm to block. The ensuing explosion ripped the entire robot apart. Once Kodai caught up, she shrunk Katsuki back down to size. Unfortunately, his head hadn't quite gotten the memo. Lying on the ground, Katsuki's SUV-sized head strained to stand on a human-sized body. Told you you'd get a headache, Kodai said. As the Gold Tips Imperial neared completion, Aizawa put on a lab apron and safety goggles. He set a laboratory scale on a marble block, teared a volumetric cylinder, and snapped open a jar of chemically pure sugar. With a metal scopula, he tipped delicate flecks of sugar into the flask until he achieved the specific mass of sugar Nezu's tea required. Using a funnel, Aizawa poured the tea inside and used a dropper to precisely level the tea at the line. He vigorously swirled the tea until every granule of sugar had dissolved. Aizawa tipped the volumetric flask into a warmed mug and shook out every last drop. He dipped an Eppendorf pipette into a jar of cream sourced from a local dairy farm and drew up a tiny, precise dose. Once he got the tea whirling with a spoon, he dispensed the cream, which formed wispy white swirls as it blended in. Next, Aizawa changed into a black butler's uniform, decorated with white frills along the collar and cuffs. He set the tea on a silver platter and held it in one hand. His polished shoes clacked on the floor as he strode up to Nezu. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he set down his offering, bowed, and stepped away. Seconds passed. Every teacher in the room held their breath, watching Nezu with a mixture of awe and dread. Nezu. Paws darted across the keyboard, and he stared wide-eyed at the screen with pupils large enough to see stars in broad daylight. Mutters about test subjects and experiments tumbled off his tongue, punctuated by the occasional maniacal cackle. Steam curled from the mug and wafted over Nezu's nose. His paws froze over the keys. Nose twitching and eyes vacant, Nezu reached for the mug and held it under his nose for a moment. Hey, is that tea ready yet? Present Mike shouted from his perch half a mile away. As one, the teachers shushed him, and Present Mike whispered back, sorry. Nezu took a sip. A warm smile spread across his face as his pupils returned to their normal size. His expression turned confused as he stared out at the carnage and destruction in front of him. Good heavens, looks like the students really went overboard this year. We'll have to lecture them on collateral damage. Every teacher let out the breath they had been holding. Aizawa glanced at the strewn wreckage of Mechagodzilla and asked, how are we going to judge points this year? The same way we always do, I imagine, Nezu said amiably. Unless there was something I missed. Aizawa pointed out the window at the heaps of robots. Nezu peered out and said, did some of the prototypes get released by mistake? No matter, I'm sure we'll think of something. It appears some of the students were seriously injured by the prototypes. Nezu grinned. That's what we pay Recovery Girl for, isn't it? Through Test Site B, The s and sobs of the examinees hung over the strewn rubble and fallen robots like a fog. Students sporting concussions, blaster burns, and broken bones from the robotic assault huddled against crumbling walls, under fallen beams, anywhere offering vague protection from the looming robotic threat that had overwhelmed them all. Through that gloomy fog cut a rhythmic, clacking sound, an auditory light in the darkness. Recovery Girl wove her way through the rubble, tapping her cane as she walked. Every 10 steps, she stuck her cane in the ground, dug a hand into the jar of gummies she held, and popped a handful in her mouth. Still chewing on the gummies, she approached a student with a broken leg. He stared up at her with a tear-strewn face and asked, "Hey, are you a nurse?" Recovery Girl chuckled and said, "Dearie, I'm Recovery Girl. I healed a man with no stomach and half a lung, and he's still kicking. Now, let's take a look at that leg, shall we?" The student gritted his teeth and pulled up his pants. Recovery Girl tutted at the swollen, purple lump below his knee. "Just a smooch, and it'll be all better. This won't hurt a bit." The moment her lips caressed his bruised skin, the student screamed in agony. Flesh writhed as the bone fragments wriggled back into place and fused together. As the swelling died down, the student screamed, "Just cut it off. Please, make it stop. All better." Recovery Girl held out her jar of gummies and said, "Here, have one. Healing like that takes a lot out of you, and these will perk you right up." Still sobbing, the student took a gummy with shaky fingers and chewed it. Within seconds, their expression turned vacant, their eyes staring out into the cosmos. A shudder ran up their spine, and their pupils grew large enough to turn their entire eyes black. The student giggled and stroked a polka-dot pink giraffe that only he could see. As she strode up to the next student, whose right arm hung limp as a cooked spaghetti noodle, he gave a squeamish glance at the student currently tripping enough balls to fill every McDonald's mosh pit in the world. He said a quick prayer and asked, "Can I have the gummy first?" Recovery Girl shrugged and held out the jar. "All the same to me, sonny. Now let's fix that arm of yours." As the gummy kicked in, Recovery Girl kissed his broken arm. The student stared numbly at the arm as it writhed like a snake until it straightened out. He tried to bend it back over, but Recovery Girl swatted at him with a cane until he stopped. Once she drugged up and healed the students at Site B, she turned towards Site A and marched forward, scarfing down gummies as she went. The moment Izuku shot the Mecha Hydra, the force from his plasma projectile slammed him through a brick wall. The side of his face slammed on stone, wrenching his head aside. Undeterred by the damage he had taken, Izuku shoved his way out of the rubble. Iida rushed over to where Izuku had landed. To his relief, his future classmate stood and stretched his arms. "Most excellently done, fellow student. Your plan was flawlessly executed, and I am honored to have been a part of it." Ochako and the others arrived next. She pointed in horror at Izuku and said, "Your head's backwards." Izuku looked down and saw his own backside. "Ah, one moment please, I shall recalibrate my next rotation." Seizing his head with both hands, Izuku wrenched his own head aside with a sickening snap. Turning back around, Izuku rolled his neck and said, "Recalibration complete. Thank you for providing feedback on my hardware issue." Iida gasped and said, "My word. You should have left such a grievous injury to a professional medical expert." The others covered their mouths, turning green. Ochako ran aside and vomited rainbows on the ground. Kaminari, wobbling on his feet and giving everyone a vacant expression, meandered up and said, "Hey guys, where'd that giant lizard go? I wanted to touch it." He noticed the rainbow puddle on the ground. "Ooh, what's this stuff?" Before anyone could stop him, Kaminari dipped his fingers in the puddle and licked it. Tastes like Skittles." Iida's mouth flapped open and shut, as if he were giving a stern lecture, but not a whisper of air left his throat. Izuku stared nonchalantly, blissfully unaware of the horror unfolding before him. The others buried their faces, too embarrassed to give Kaminari a much-needed reality check. Ochako stared back and forth between Kaminari and the vomit he had just tasted. Her cheeks bulged, then she vomited another torrent of rainbows at Kaminari's feet. Kaminari looked at the vomit, then his fingers, then Ochako, then back at the vomit. As fried as his brain was, it eventually gathered the disparate facts, compiled them in a semi-coherent report, and announced them before an assembly of the few functional neurons he still had rattling around his skull. Kaminari licked his fingers again, still struggling to come to terms with the reality unfolding around him. Sato sprinted away, struggling to keep down his own breakfast. Iida's face turned blue as his lungs stopped functioning. Ochako gave Kaminari a bewildered stare before vomiting a second batch. This time, Kaminari's eyes widened with shock. He wiped his fingers on his shirt, backed away from the puddle, and tried to scrub his tongue with his hands. Watching the chaos unfold, Izuku asked, "Should I sample some of the strange liquid as well?" Iida's eyes rolled into his sockets, and he collapsed. Ochako gave one last dry heave before joining him. Staring at his own hands in horror, Kaminari said, "I'm never using my quirk again." As Izuku's group headed towards UA's testing facility, the rhythmic tap of Recovery Girl's cane caught their attention. Izuku's mechanical eyes zoomed in on the elderly hero. Shuzenji Chiyo, Recovery Girl, currently employed at UA. Born April 4, 2076, registered Quirk heel, frequently purchases Yoroi Musha brand arthritis cream and has House and Dexter listed as favorite series on her Netflix account. "Dude," Sato said, "that's hella creepy." Eyeing the students, Recovery Girl said, "Looks like you're in better shape than the others. Still, can't hurt to pass around a few gummies. They'll perk you right up." Sato grinned. "Gummies. Awesome. I could use a top off." He popped a handful in his mouth. After he swallowed, his whole body rippled. Muscles bulged out, ripping his clothes. With a booming laugh, Sato stomped the ground hard enough to stagger everyone around him. "These gummies are amazing," Sato bellowed at the heavens. "Time to kick God's ass." After Sato sprinted off in another direction, Kaminari dashed up to her and said, "Me next. I'm gonna get super jacked." Kaminari took a whole mouthful and swallowed them whole. A high-pitched hum came from him as his whole body vibrated violently. Then, with the sound of a cathode TV losing power, Kaminari's eyes dimmed, and the vibrating stopped. He held up one hand and wriggled his fingers in front of his face. "When did I get so many fingers?" Kaminari giggled. "I could hold so many controllers with these." "How about the rest of you?" Recovery Girl asked. "Any injuries I should know about?" "Well, I am feeling a bit nauseous," Ochako said. Recovery Girl held out the jar. With a look of trepidation at Kaminari drooling on the ground, Ochako ate one. She put her hands on her face, and her feet left off the ground. "Wow, I feel amazing," Ochako said. "It's like I'm floating." Recovery Girl turned to Iida. "One for you, dearie." "No thank you, madam. My parents instructed me never to accept unknown substances from strangers, and those gummies of yours seem to have highly irregular side effects for everyone taking them. I will have to request an active ingredient list and consult my primary physician before." Recovery Girl tossed a gummy in his mouth. Iida stopped mid-rant, lowered his raised finger, and slouched his shoulders. "That tastes pretty good, thank you." "You're welcome." To Izuku, she asked, "Any medical concerns?" His head was backwards, Iida said. "Broken neck, I can fix that." She pressed a kiss on Izuku's cheek. Nothing happened. Frowning, Recovery Girl said, "I'll get the lawyer," and tapped her cane on the ground. An office rose from the rubble behind her. The lawyer seated at the desk pointed at the stack of papers in front of him and said, "I'll need you to sign these waivers." After Izuku signed and photographed the pages, the office sank into the ground. Recovery Girl walked off and said over her shoulder, "Best of luck, kid. You'll need it." "Hey Power Loader," Nezu asked as he stared out over heaps of robots from iconic franchises, "did you consult our legal team when you made those robots?" Maijima shrugged. "It's not like we're making a video of this stuff, right?" From his perch half a mile away, Present Mike shouted, "It already has 50 million views." Nezu took a sip of his tea and said, "You do realize how cutthroat Disney can be when defending their IPs, right? They put a lot of work into buying out every last franchise in the world, and they'll be damned if they let anyone else play with their toys." Maijima snorted. "What are they going to do, sue us?" The sound of footsteps, from feet beyond counting yet perfectly in sync, broke the silence. From over the horizon, Countless bland-faced men in three-piece suits, each carrying a suitcase, marched in rank and file towards the UA campus. A flagbearer at the front bore a black Mickey on a pale blue field. "Oh dear," Nezu said, "it looks like they're filing a cease and desist. So, we just take back the video, right?" The ground shook. As the rank and file marched forward, a lumbering titan strode behind them. The hideous behemoth, covered in white plumage and wearing a blue sailor suit, its duckbill like two school buses crushed together, scouring the ground at its feet with its huge, bloodshot eyes, flattened the debris beneath its webbed feet. A thick iron collar clamped around its neck, and a team of lawyers wrangled it forward. When it saw the UA campus, it let out a wheezing, high-pitched roar and raced forward, yanking its handlers behind it. Aizawa scowled at the massive army at UA's gates. "I do believe they intend to make sure we cease and desist breathing." "Not to worry," Nezu said, "I have a foolproof weapon for exactly this occasion." Nezu went over to one of the emergency glass cases marked, "In case of Disney," and smashed it open. He took out the speech card and set up the microphone. Nezu cleared his throat and said, "This work of fan fiction is a non-profit fan-based parody. My Hero Academia is owned by Shueisha, Viz Media, Shonen Jump, Studio Bones, Funimation, and Kohei Horikoshi, all subsidiaries of our great and magnanimous Disney corporate overlords. Please support the original release." As Nezu's words rang out over the campus, the lawyers ground to a halt. Each as thin as a sheet of paper, the lawyers turned sideways and disappeared. The giant Donald Duck grumbled angrily to itself as it lumbered back across the ocean. The sound of crumbling masonry filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Sounds like a wall broke," Vlad King remarked. "Yes, the fourth one," Nezu said cheerfully. "Just ignore it and it should be fine." Maijima looked outside, confused. "I'm think more than 4 broke out there." "I said ignore it." In the rubble of a testing area, the examinees had all crowded around, shrugging off the effects of Recovery Girl's treatment. Sato only wore his underwear and left sock, and he sported a spectacular black eye given to him by God himself. Kaminari drooled and gave off the occasional spark, and Iida alternated between politely chatting with his neighbors and ranting about the evils of medical fraud. Nezu addressed the crowd from his nest in Aizawa's scarf. "Thank you all for gathering here. Normally, we would send you all on your way and give you the results next week, but given the unusual circumstances this time around, we're trying a different approach." "What were those other robots even worth?" Nezu shrugged. "Before we ask that, why don't we have a show of hands? Who doesn't want to enter our hero program?" The students, exhausted and traumatized by the robot invasion, raised hands in droves. "Excellent. You're all dismissed." Mineta, trapped between a rock and a hard place, or in other words, Hiroshima and Tetsu, struggled with tears streaming down his face to join the flock of students heading for the gate, but the hardening duo proved too solid for him to budge. Kota, too timid to raise his hand or speak out, remained nervously rooted at the spot, staring Nezu as though the principal were about to chew off his feet. Nezu did a quick head count. "That leaves exactly 36 of you left. Congratulations. You're all accepted." "What about our test scores?" Mina asked. "I'll be honest, I think I failed." "Irrelevant. UA always takes the top 36 applicants, with 4 recommended by heroes. As you're the only ones left, the points and tests don't matter." "How imprudent of you," Iida cried. "You stoop to accept those unworthy of UA's lofty standards simply because they are all that remain. It's a disgrace too." Iida slouched over as his voice trailed off. "Actually, I don't see why it's a big deal. They're still here, so why not?" Iida shook himself. "No, standards must be maintained." He shrugged. "It's not like there's anyone else to pick from." Standing straighter, Iida said, "Then take only the finest that remain. UA is the bastion of the hero world and must remain selective with its candidates for the sake of hero society." Recovery Girl walked forward, gummy in hand. "Oh dear, still seems like you're out of sorts. Here, have another one." Iida relaxed after Recovery Girl shoved the candy in his mouth. Nezu grinned and said, "Right, we'll mail you your acceptance letters. See you all in the spring." Once the students filed out, Nezu turned towards Smentos. Ishiyama-san, be sure to put the cities back the way they were, alright? We'll need them for classes tomorrow. Sminta stared at block after block of rubble and broken robots. With a heartfelt sigh, the cement hero molded new buildings from the wreckage. Bakugo grinned as he stepped into the 1A classroom. Not a sign of the robot anywhere amid all the extras. The mood in the room felt tense, and rumors of what hardships lay ahead flew around the room. After all, if the entrance exam had armies of robots, surely everything that came after had to be much worse. Dude, Baku bro, Hiroshima called out. Pull up a seat. What do you think they'll have us do first? Bench press cars. Stop a train with our bare hands. Launch us off a spring platform into a forest full of giant shadow monsters hungry for human flesh. Mineta, in the next seat over, shivered violently and prayed to every female deity known to man for his salvation. Bakugo slapped his hands together, popping a small explosion between his fingers. Who cares? I can handle whatever they throw at me. Hiroshima wept manly tears at his words. So manly. I knew you were the coolest ever. We are all the coolest ever. Monoma shouted from another desk, for we are all 1A. We'll show those 1B idiots that we are the supreme class in this institution. A yellow beanbag crawled on the floor like a caterpillar. As the class stared at it in confusion, it opened, revealing an exhausted face with bloodshot eyes and a dark 5 o'clock shadow. 8 seconds. Next time. Don't waste any of my time. 8 seconds for what? Juro asked. Don't ask stupid questions either, Aizawa snapped. He pulled gym outfits out of his sleeping bag. Now, put these on and go outside. Mina picked one up with a disgusted expression. I hope you washed that sleeping bag, dude. As Aizawa's eye twitched, an explosion rocked the school. Half the classroom leapt under their desks, alert for any sign of danger. Bakugo and Kirishima stood, both grinning at the prospect of danger. A muffled scraping sound came from the hallway. Juro was the first to clap her hands over her ears, but as the sound grew louder, the rest of the class followed suit. Stay here, Aizawa said. I'll investigate. As Aizawa approached the door, it slammed open. Vlad King, with his yellow visor cracked, his red hero suit charred and still burning on one shoulder, his face blacked with soot, and all the hair on his head scorched off, stomped into the room, dragging Deku behind him. Heat curled from the arm still molded into a plasma cannon. He tossed Deku into a chair and said, Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Vlad King pointed to each student, stopping just before the last syllable with his hand pointing at Deku. The teacher swallowed a grimace, pointed at Monoma, and grabbed him by the collar. As Momona was dragged from the room, he shouted back, 1B is better than you losers. Aizawa glared at the new arrival and said, I knew I shouldn't have given him that free transfer. Aizawa scowled at the collected students. Many of them wore the clothing with expressions of disgust. If they wanted to make it as heroes, they'd have to deal with far worse than a bit of BO. Throw this as far as you can without leaving the circle, Aizawa said as he tossed a baseball at Midoriya. Lowest score gets expelled. Wait, what? Mina shouted over the general outrage of the class. How is that fair? There's 6 other events. It's perfectly fair. That's not the point. If I hear more complaining, it'll be 2 people going home. That zipped up the class immediately. Midoriya stepped into the circle and stared out at the open field. Aizawa twitched an eye at the apparent waste of time. Midoriya, will you be throwing that baseball sometime today? Calculations to maximize the distance achieved by the baseball's trajectory are still in progress. Approximately 46 hours, 48 hours, 47 hours, 69 hours. Katsuki scoffed. You need to give him a time limit or he'll be there all day. Aizawa inwardly groaned. Great, a special needs student, he muttered to himself. You have 60 seconds. From when? From the time I stepped into the circle. From now. Midoriya bit off his own pinky. Then he swallowed the baseball whole. Seconds later, he opened his chest and pulled out a metal sphere. His hand morphed into a plasma cannon, and he put the sphere inside. A beam of brilliant green light shot out, propelling the metal-coated baseball high into the air. The high-pitched scream of plasma crackling against metal set Aizawa's teeth on edge. While the baseball soared well out of campus grounds, Midoriya charged a second shot. Aizawa couldn't even see the baseball, but he could see the plasma glance off it as the extra shot pushed it even further. As Midoriya prepared a third shot, Kaminari whispered, "There's no way he's hitting it again." A third shot rang out. It vanished over the horizon. Aizawa checked his score, and it shot up even faster. Judging by the final number, it landed somewhere in Europe, preferably without killing someone. "Bakugo, you're up next." What was his score? Katsuki snarled. "Focus on your own performance." "Fine, I'll just send it into orbit." Katsuki worked himself into a sweat, gathered it all in his hands, and slathered the baseball with it. With a tremendous wind-up, he shouted, "Die!" A tremendous conflagration engulfed the hot-headed teen. Aizawa winced as his ears were yet again subjected to unreasonable amounts of noise. As the smoke cleared, bits of blackened baseball rained down. "You're not getting another one." Katsuki grinned. "Like I need a pity throw. I know that had to beat Deku." Aizawa decided not to inform him that with the tracker destroyed, he didn't even get a score. "Yaoyorozu, you're up next." When she pulled a cannon out of her chest, Aizawa groaned and covered his ears. Aizawa had a quandary. On one hand, logic dictated that he pushes his students to their absolute limits to better understand their quirks and their mindsets. On the other hand, sunset was 10 minutes ago, most of his students had left hours ago, and Midoriya and Yaoyorozu were still running laps around the school. Well, Midoriya was cruising along on treads built into his feet, while Yaoyorozu rode the Segway she had made after her scooter ran out of gas, but Aizawa hardly cared about the semantics at this point. For some godforsaken reason, Kirishima and Bakugo had stayed to watch. Then the butler had shown up. Aizawa had called up Nezu to lecture him on security, but the rodent could hardly refuse one of the school's top donors. So, Aizawa sat ramrod straight, on his best behavior for the butler, unable to sleep a wink and dreading the patrol he'd have in an hour. His coffee and jelly packs had run out ages ago, and his scarf twitched with the badly suppressed urge to strangle everyone around him. "Kick his ass, Ponytail!" Bakugo shouted. "Show that robot that humanity won't take this one laying down. Don't let him win. You are doing most spectacularly, Miss Yaoyorozu." The butler called out as he elegantly waved a Yaoyorozu sign he had retrieved from his limo. "I have the utmost faith that you will put that rapscallion of a classmate in his place." "Go Midoriya," Kirishima shouted. "You're the manliest ever." Bakugo whirled around. "Why are you cheering for the robot?" Well, everyone else was cheering for Yaoyorozu-san. It wouldn't be manly to leave Midori bro without any support. He turned back to the marathon and shouted, "You're also very manly Yaoyorozu." The butler gave him an affronted look. "Why, good sir, Miss Yaoyorozu is nothing of the kind. She is the epitome of elegance and grace and has nothing of the boorishness of man. Chillax, bro, manliness knows no gender." Yaoyorozu's Segway sputtered to a stop. Running off it, Yaoyorozu tried to make a pair of rollerblades, but they came out missing their wheels. She gave a stoic grimace and continued running, despite how thin her quirk had left her. Stepping in, Aizawa called out, "Midoriya, how much longer can you keep that pace? I currently have 12 hours and 47 minutes of battery life remaining. Once the sun rises, net power consumption will drop by 86%. Think you can match that, Yaoyorozu?" She gave her classmate one last stubborn look before giving in. "No, sensei, I'm exhausted. There's a time and a place to exceed your limits. Here, it'll do more harm than good." As Yaoyorozu walked away, Bakugo stormed over. "You're humanity's last hope, and you're throwing in the towel. Get back out there and win." "For your information," Aizawa snapped, "the marathon results don't matter." Midoriya placed first by a wide margin. When Bakugo lunged for Midoriya, Aizawa finally had his excuse to strangle someone. As the second day of class started, Jiro had an internal debate with herself. On one hand, she really didn't want to stick her hand in the hornet's nest that was whatever the heck Midoriya and Bakugo had going on. However, morbid curiosity about why there were only 20 sets of heartbeats, 19 from the students plus the arrhythmic, caffeine-driven stutter of Aizawa's shriveled circulatory organ, overruled her self-preservation instincts. Midoriya, weird question. That is indeed a weird question, given that you haven't asked anything, Midoriya replied. Juro rolled her eyes. Mind if I ask why you don't have a heart? Bakugo stormed over, grinning so fiercely that Juro felt her fight and flight instincts kick in. She held her squirming jacks in her hand to keep them from gouging out Bakugo's eyeballs. It's because he's a robot. Bakugo roared. Finally, hard, cold evidence. Juro jabbed him in the neck. No one asked you. Actually, I do have a heart, Midoriya said. Want to see? See? Juro asked. See what? Izuku rolled up his shirt. Juro felt herself sweat profusely at the sight of six-pack abs in front of her. Mina Wolf whistled and said, Damn, Midoriya, way to put on a show. The mood in the classroom took a sudden and precipitous freefall when Izuku plunged a scalpel into his chest. Ochako threw up more rainbows, Tokiyami muttered something about madness and darkness, and Kota's eyes rolled into the back of his head as he tipped sideways. Juro fought back her own hysteria as Izuku peeled back the skin over his chest. Midoriya reached inside and pulled out a small boxy machine with clear tubing on either end. This is my heart. Juro listened to it, but it didn't make a sound. Is it beating? Not currently. I only circulate blood when I need to reconstruct parts of my body, as it's what carries the components I break down, along with the nanomachines that make them in my bloodstream. See, Bakugo roared. He even has nanomachines. It's his quirk, is it not? Todoroki asked, staring at Midoriya's open chest with an apathetic expression. I don't understand the fuss. I take it that's the stomach. Juro asked, pointing at a big boxy container. Yep, it incinerates everything inside and absorbs any remaining metals into my bloodstream. It also has thermal vents to power the battery back here, if I consume anything that can undergo an exothermic reaction. He pointed to a metal cylinder with light panels along the side, showing he had full charge, hooked up to bundles of wires running across his body. Wait, hold on, Zero asked. Is this just an elaborate way to go into detail about how your body works without making it seem forced and unnatural? A sharp crack of bricks breaking filled the room. Over the intercom, Nezu said, Smintos, the wall broke again. You know which one. From down the hall, Smintos said, why do I have to keep fixing it? When Aizawa announced that they would be picking their representatives, 1A erupted in a cacophony of shouts. Already done with existence, Aizawa put on some industrial-grade earplugs, wore noise-canceling headphones over those, and buried himself so deep in his sleeping bag that it would take a spelunking crew weeks to find him. Once Iida called for a democratic vote, a full election cycle ensued. Many campaign speeches were had, hats and flags were distributed, and babies were kissed. Iida took the polls and tallied up the votes. First, we have Yaoyorozu as president with 18 votes. What? Bakugo roared. How did Ponytail get that many votes? Kaminari, sweating nervously, hid a hand inside his pocket. Oh, you know, she makes a very compelling argument about, confiscating the ill-gotten capital of the bourgeoisie and disseminating it among the proletariat. She's not a communist, you moron. She's richer than, Bakugo cut off with a glance at Kaminari's bulging pockets. His hand shot inside and came out stuffed with bills. She bribed you. No, that's just my lunch money. Bakugo stalked around the room and found more wads of cash. Did you bribe the whole school, Ponytail? Yaoyorozu gave him a perplexed look. Isn't that how elections work? Iida glared down at her. My word, I can hardly believe the scandal. Bribing the constituents. It goes against the very spirit of this school. Well, either you're happy to see us, Juro said flatly, or she bribed you too. Iida, his own pockets bulging with dirty money, hung his head in shame. Paragon of virtue that I am, even I fell victim to the wiles of capitalism. For shame. Well, at least the robot didn't win, Bakugo grumbled. Last thing we need are robots in charge of the government. And for vice president, we have Midoriya with 2 votes. A bone-chilling silence settled over the room as Bakugo slowly turned towards Midoriya. Of course, Bakugo said slowly, his voice tinged with hysteria. That's your game, isn't it? Have the pretty rich girl be your puppet while you pull the strings from behind the scenes, and when the time's right, kill her off and take power for yourself. Well, it won't work. I've seen right through your plan, and I'll defy you and your false regime with my dying breath. Hold on, Ochako said. Bakugo didn't vote for Yaoyorozu or Midoriya, right? Correct. It would appear there is one vote for Bakugo as well. That makes 21 votes, right? Iida looked down, flustered, at the piles of votes. Why, that can't possibly be right. I triple-checked. How could I have failed democracy so thoroughly? Tokiyami's shadow snickered. The class turned as the sentient Quirk held up pen and paper. I voted for Midoriya because I thought it would be funny. And it is. With a roar, Bakugo lunged for the shadow and faceplanted into a wall. From his office, watching the whole affair play out on camera, Nezu said, I love democracy. An hour after word of All Might's employment at UA had reached the press, news crews from across the country rushed to UA's gates. For blocks, the streets were packed with reporters salivating over the slightest taste of newsworthy material. Yaoyorozu, having caught wind of the media frenzy, invited her classmates into her limo. As her butler drove over people and cameras with reckless abandon, the students of 1A enjoyed a brunch of cured hams, expensive cheeses, and flavorful fruit preserves with toasted bread slices. Too bad Izuku isn't here with us, Ochako said as she crammed as much food into her cheeks as physically possible. Yeah, too bad, Momo said. I couldn't get a hold of him. Miss Yaoyorozu, the butler said, it would be no trouble to swing by his residence. In a low voice, he added, I'd get to run over more reporters that way. No need, I imagine he has already made it to school. Indeed, you are right Yaoyorozu-san. Iida shouted. Such diligence from him, he truly is worthy of the position as vice president. He raised his glass of orange juice and said, to our class representatives. Their diligence serves as an example for all of us. Moods lifted by the fine dining and spacious limo, the students echoed, to the reps. Meanwhile, Izuku made his own way through the reporters, which involved a fair bit of shoving, trampling, and the odd bite taken out of cameras. Once he reached the gates, reporters latched onto his gray uniform. You're a UA student, right? What can you tell us about All Might? Izuku turned towards the reporters. All Might is 220 centimeters tall and weighs 255 kilograms. He has blonde hair, blue eyes, and his birthday is July 10th. That's nice and all, but what about? His blood type is a positive, Izuku said, droning on over their protests. He was born in Tokyo, and he went to UA High School, though records of his other primary education aren't publicly available. Could you please just tell us? He went to Harvard University, where he earned a bachelor's in accounting. He then started the All Might Agency, situated on Yokohama Street in Tokyo. Izuku's monotonous lecture droned on for hours, covering every villain he had arrested, every life he had saved, his favorite foods and beverages, and plenty other mundane facts to make eyes glaze over. By the time Izuku mentioned how All Might's quirk could be inherited and how he had lost a lung 5 years ago, the reporters and cameramen had all nodded off. Even the cameras and microphones had stopped recording out of sheer boredom. Once he was done, Izuku walked through the gate and arrived just in time for homeroom. It was dusk when Shigaraki finally snapped out of his stupor, walked home, and decayed a barstool in a fit of rage when he realized he had forgotten to grab a class schedule. Kurogiri sighed and warped over to get the schedule. Hey Mina-chan. Yeah, Kaminari-san, we're dead. Mina gave her partner a playful shove on the shoulder. We'll be fine. You have electricity and I have acid. We'll be awesome at this. You remember that laser thing from yesterday? Imagine that ripping this building apart. Mina blanched, an impressive feat given her pink skin. We're dead. Footsteps echoed through the building, distant at first, but growing steadily louder as the seconds passed. Sparks crackled across Kaminari's skin as he quaked in terror, while acid dripped from Mina's trembling fingers. Izuku walked into the room. Kaminari shrieked and said, 1 billion volt indiscriminate shock. Electricity poured out of Kaminari, yet the high-voltage torrent passed harmlessly through Izuku and dissipated into the concrete at his feet. With a dopey expression on his face, Kaminari stumbled forward and stared woozily at Izuku. Voice slurring, Kaminari said, "What are you looking at me funny for? I bet I could knock your lights out. Izuku didn't move as Kaminari threw a wobbling punch. His knuckles cracked when they slammed into Izuku's face. Staring dumbly at his crooked fingers, Kaminari said, "Wow, I didn't know I could bend my fingers that way." All Might said over the intercom, "I believe we should count Kaminari Shonen as out. Medical bots, please take him to Recovery Girl." 2 robots ran in with a stretcher. One whacked Kaminari over the head with a rolling pin, and the other tried to catch him. Kaminari missed the stretcher entirely and hit the floor with a thump. The robots shrugged, loaded him onto the stretcher, and ran out the door. Mina stood in front of the bomb and swallowed. "Any chance you could take it easy on me?" Izuku cocked his head. "Of course. I will defeat you as swiftly as possible, so you don't have to struggle so much." "Great," Mina groaned. "Well then, acid attack." The moment the viscous glob of acid flew towards him, Izuku dove aside. Mina flung more and more, spattering the room with white sludge. "Warning. Caustic chemicals present, initiating escape plan Alpha." Izuku turned around, sprinted straight through a concrete wall, and leapt out the window. Not believing her eyes, Mina ran up to the broken window and saw Izuku sprint straight through UA's perimeter gate. Mina leapt up and cheered. "Woohoo! Took out the strongest student in the class. How do you like them apples?" A static hum and a sharp crackle made her turn around. A green lightsaber sawed a circle around the bomb. It fell through the floor. Mineta, holding the lightsaber, grinned and tapped the bomb with his free hand. Katsuki, who hadn't taken his eyes off the fight for one moment, stared speculatively at the acid as it ate its way down to the foundations of the building. Then he burst out into maniacal cackling. All Might Sensei," Zero said. "I think something's wrong with him. Give me some acid, raccoon eyes." Katsuki shouted as he chased Mina around the classroom. "What do I look like, a cow? Get that bucket away from me." Bakugo-san," Yaoyorozu said, "I don't think it's very safe storing a strong acid in metal. There's a high chance it would cause a reaction." "That's the point, Ponytail." The second the door opened, Mina and Bakugo bolted for their seats. The bucket Bakugo had been carrying rattled around as it settled on Kota's head, and yet, the stony-faced teen sat stock still, hoping the teacher wouldn't notice him if he didn't move. "Your CQC was atrocious yesterday," Aizawa snapped. "Get geared up, you'll be running hand-to-hand drills for the next 2 hours." Everyone rushed for the door. Kota, bucket still on his head, rushed straight into a wall before fumbling his way after everyone else. When the classroom was finally empty, Aizawa muttered to himself and crawled back in his sleeping bag. Under Ectoplasm's watchful eye, the class paired up. Bakugo made a beeline for Mina. Mina blocked a punch. "I'm not giving you any acid. It's for the fate of humanity. I'm not letting you prank Midoriya. My acid's too dangerous for that." "Who said anything about a prank?" Bakugo swept Mina's legs out from under her and pinned her to the floor. He grabbed an arm and stroked along the wrist. "What the? Are you trying to milk my arms?" "There has to be a way to get it out," Bakugo muttered. "Maybe like this." He bent her wrist backwards, just enough to make Mina wince. Twisting underneath him, Mina freed an arm and socked him in the nose. "Thieth ithneth ofer," Katsuki said, cradling his bleeding nose as he went to Recovery Girl's office. At the end of the day, as Mina walked out of the school, a figure wearing a giant green mask shouted, "Ooga booga." Mina shrieked and instinctively threw acid at the figure. As the acid ate through the mask, Katsuki scooped some into a jar. "Yes," Katsuki shouted, holding the jar over his head. "At long last, I can finally rid the world of the robot menace. Victory is mine." Katsuki cackled maniacally and ran down the street, shouting, "I've got a jar of acid, guess what's inside it?" Mina stared after him, thought about warning him that even glass couldn't hold her acid, then shrugged and went on her merry way. That night, fearing the robots would take his secret weapon away from him, Katsuki slept with the jar cradled in his arms. He woke the next morning to the smell of burnt fabric. The jar had a hole in the bottom. The acid had not only eaten through his bed, but also the floor, the kitchen counter downstairs, the water heater, one of All for One's safe houses stashed away underground, and another 3 miles of bedrock. As he stared down the hole, his mother stared up at him and shouted, "Katsuki! USJ! USJ!" The students of 1A chanted. "I can't believe we're going to Universal Studios Japan." 13 gave Aizawa a sidelong look as they watched students cram into the bus. "You didn't tell them where we're actually going." They leapt to their own conclusions. It felt illogical to waste time correcting them when they would see the truth soon enough. 13 shuddered. "Boy, am I glad you weren't teaching when I was in high school." The bus lurched sideways when Midoriya stepped inside. The wheels bounced up and down with each step he took. "How much does he weigh?" 13 asked. "I suspect it varies based on comedic value," Aizawa deadpanned. As 13 pulled the bus out of the parking lot, an ear-wrenching shriek came from the back bumper. Jiro squeezed Ojiro's tail around her ears until Momo handed her a pair of noise-canceling headphones. With his scarf wrapped around his ears, Aizawa investigated the source of the noise. Midoriya sat at the very back of the bus. Every time 13 hit the gas, a shower of sparks came up through the back window. "Midoriya, move up a few seats." The back bumper lifted off the ground, and the sparks stopped. The moment he sat down, next to the window, the bus sagged to the side. Caught off balance by the bus's shifting weight, Shoji and Sato tumbled to the right. The bus pitched sideways, and more students fell towards Midoriya's side. "Everyone, left side of the bus!" Aizawa shouted as he threw himself towards the slowly rising side. Kirishima hardened up and threw himself halfway out a window, and Mineta stuck himself to the side with his hair balls. Unfortunately, Izuku also went over to the left side of the bus. The left wheels slammed onto pavement, and the right ones rose into the air. 13 clung desperately to the wheel as gravity tried to pull her out of her seat. Aizawa pulled himself to the right side with his scarf, Asui grappled forward with her tongue, and Ochako floated around the bus like an anti-gravity pinball, holding back a fresh batch of rainbow vomit. Over the commotion, Aizawa shouted, "Midoriya, stand exactly in the center of the bus." The left wheels touched down as Izuku stood in the aisle. The bus rode ludicrously close to the ground, but no scraping sounds plagued them. The class breathed a collective sigh of relief as the bus finally stabilized. "Midoriya, mind explaining why you're so heavy?" "I ate a big breakfast this morning, so I would have more material for the unforeseen simulation joint." "Wait, that's what USJ means?" Kaminari shouted in despair. As S of anguish echoed through the bus, a loud groaning sound silenced them all. 2 sharp snaps, in rapid succession, came from the front and back of the bus. The entire chassis lurched down, and 4 tires rolled away on the road. "You're late," Shigaraki said the moment everyone showed up. "And All Might's not here. All respect to the programmers, but whoever coded your NPC behavior should be fired." "Who are you?" Aizawa barked. "And why are you here?" "I had this whole villain monologue thing planned out, but we're behind schedule." "Kurogiri, do the thing." "What thing?" Kurogiri asked. Shigaraki glared at him. "We went over this. Just make the portals already." "Understood, sir." A portal appeared under Shigaraki's feet. As he fell through, he shouted, "Wrong lever." "Always wanted to do that," Kurogiri mused. He looked up at the heroes and said, "Right, you're still here. Let's fix that." Holes opened underneath everyone's feet. Iida sprinted away in time, while Ochako floated herself away and Siro latched onto her with his tape. Most everyone else, including Izuku, fell through. A ship appeared underneath Izuku. He plummeted through the deck, past the engine block, and straight through the hull, ripping through the metal like tissue paper. As he sank towards the bottom, a shark-faced villain darted towards him. Tsuyu frantically swam after him, but the villain reached him first. The villain took bit into his torso. All his teeth snapped off, and a trail of red marked the fleeing villain's path. Tsuyu tried to pull Izuku, but Izuku proved far too heavy for her to move. As her oxygen ran out, Tsuyu swam up to the rapidly sinking deck of the enormous. Mineta frantically tried to patch the hull with his balls, but the water pressure kept pushing them away. Seeing villains closing in and the boat sinking, Tsuyu picked up a stray violin and started playing. Mineta looked up and shouted, "What do you think this is, the Titanic?" "Well, what else can we do?" At least let me draw you like one of those French girls. Suyu slapped him with her tongue. I don't like the French. They ate one of my cousins. The ship tilted to the side. Mineta shrieked and clutched at Suyu, only to come away covered in mucus when Suyu wriggled out of his grasp. Crunching sounds came from the bottom of the ship, and the ship sank even faster. The villains are coming. We're doomed. Yeah, probably. Why are you so calm? The deck vanished beneath the water. Once they sank up to their knees, however, the sinking stopped. The deck rose, now green in color, and Izuku's face looked out from the prow of a brand new ship. I am a boat now, Izuku said. That's nice. Could you get us back to dry land? The villains, hearing all this, shouted, they're getting away. Stop them. They rushed towards the back of the boat. The back of the boat rushed towards them. Villains shrieked as the stern smacked them into the air. Oops, Izuku said. Installed the engine throttle backwards. You're all the short ones now. Mineta shouted down from the cockpit in Izuku's chest as he piloted Izuku's giant body through the throngs of villains. Not so funny now, is it? Suyu and Ojiro sat in front of a hedgerow and watched the carnage. Ojiro asked, why is Mineta piloting Izuku's body? He was the only one small enough to fit. Let me rephrase that. Why is Izuku a giant mecha with Mineta in his chest? Off in the distance, Mineta said, I wonder what this button does. One of Izuku's arms crackled with electricity. The villains' shrieks nearly drowned out Mineta's maniacal cackling and shouting of unlimited power. Well, Suyu said, once Izuku landed on the beach, we saw that Aizawa-sensei needed help taking out the villains. I didn't know that boat in the flood zone worked. Izuku was the boat. Ojiro gawked at Izuku for a second. Izuku's shoulders opened, and a volley of rockets flew around him. Villains went flying like bowling pins. Right, Ojiro said. That's a thing Izuku's quirk does. Why was he a boat? Suyu gave him a deadpan stare that spoke volumes of her apathy towards the continuing chaos. He crashed through the boat, ate it, and became the boat. So, we thought about how we could help Aizawa-sensei. Mineta said Izuku could do it. Izuku said he couldn't harm anyone, since it went against his prime directives. At Ojiro's puzzled expression, she added, his words, not mine. Right, so, he can't harm villains, but he can allow them to come to harm. How does that work? Suyu shrugged. I read Asimov. A brilliant green flash cut across the landscape. Villains and debris went flying as a plasma beam cut a long furrow into the ground. Ojiro opened his mouth, then promptly shut it. Instead, he asked, does Mineta have complete control over Izuku? I would assume so. Why? I don't think that's a good idea. The robot stopped in its tracks. Mineta shouted at Izuku, hey, let me get a closer look. Just a little nudge on her skirt, and we'll have the perfect view. Izuku didn't budge. Protocol 2, uphold the mission. Our mission is to aid Aizawa-sensei, not acquire additional visual data on the villains. Protocol 1 was link with the pilot, Suyu told Ojiro. Shigaraki finally tired of watching his cannon fodder get stomped on by a height-challenged teenager. A purple blur punched Izuku in the chest and sent him flying. Izuku staggered to his feet. Chassis of insufficient strength to deter current threat. Initiating Protocol 3, protect the pilot. Izuku wrenched his chest open, grabbed Mineta, and hurled him towards the entrance. The Nomu grabbed both of Izuku's arms and pulled. The steel chassis tore in two, and Izuku's smaller body fell out of the mech's spine. Lying between Ojiro and Suyu in a pool of his own blood, Aizawa asked, can you please take me to the hospital? SSH, Ojiro said, the boss fight's starting. Sir, you are currently breaking the law, Izuku told the hulking monstrosity as it clawed at his head. I must ask you to hand yourself into the nearest local authorities. RRAGH. The Nomu shrieked as it lunged again. Izuku blocked the next swipe with his forearm. Said forearm bent at a sharp angle from the force of the blow. Within seconds, the nanomachines in Izuku's body straightened and repaired the limb. Attempts at negotiation have failed. Attempting nonviolent pacification measures. The Nomu threw another punch. Despite being a fraction of the monster's size, Izuku grabbed its wrist and slammed it to the ground with a perfect judo throw. Pouncing on the monster's back, Izuku pinned both arms into place. Pacification complete. Contacting local authorities. Izuku's head emitted a ringtone. Error. Communications cut. Please hold while an alternate directive is devised. The Nomu did not appreciate being put on hold. With a shriek, it bucked and threw Izuku off its back. It grabbed one of his legs, slammed him into the concrete a few times, and threw him. Izuku shook concrete gravel off his back. Restraining measures ineffective. Attempting knockout. As the Nomu charged, Izuku widened his stance. Izuku sidestepped a blow and slammed his fist into the Nomu's jaw. The blow didn't even faze the monster. A scrub like you doesn't stand a chance against Nomu, Shigaraki jeered from the sidelines. Its shock absorption quirk gives it physical damage immunity. Understood, Izuku said. Knockout impossible, now attempting temporary incapacitation. Izuku drew a lightsaber and slashed through the tendons in the Nomu's legs. Flesh bubbled out of the charred wounds and healed the damage. Shigaraki's grin widened. Health recovery as well, from the region quirk. It's the perfect weapon to kill All Might. Query. Izuku said. Villain has multiple quirks. It was made that way, Shigaraki answered. Villains, after all, had a contract obligation to explain their villainous plots and devices. Understood. Reclassifying threat to biological weapon. Lethal force authorized. Izuku leapt as the Nomu punched down. Concrete burst in chunks around the monster's fist. Izuku leapt nimbly on the monster's shoulder and swept his lightsaber through the Nomu's neck. The Nomu knelt as its head thumped onto the shattered concrete. Izuku walked towards Shigaraki, lightsaber thrumming at his side. Come quietly, or there will be trouble. Nomu stood. A new head sprouted from the stump between its shoulders. Before Izuku could turn, the Nomu grabbed Izuku's head, twisted, and yanked it off his shoulders. Izuku's body crumpled to the ground. Izuku. Tsuyu bolted to her feet, but Ojiro held her back. Well, that was fun. Which kid should we kill next? Izuku's hand glowed. The headless body lumbered clumsily to its feet. It twisted its arm around until it was pointed at the Nomu, and a brilliant beam of plasma engulfed the monster. The smoldering feet and ankles, the Nomu's only remains, didn't regenerate. Izuku's body, out of power, fell once more as the USJ doors slammed open. Yaoyorozu landed on a sofa placed inexplicably on top of a mountain. 5 villains leered at her from behind. 5 villains ran away screaming when Yaoyorozu drew a rocket launcher out of her cleavage. Flames towered around Todoroki as he took in his surroundings. The villains smirked as they closed in around him, no doubt believing that the flames made his ice weaker when in fact they made it stronger. This is fine, Todoroki said. With a wave of his hand, the ground, the villains, and the flames themselves froze solid. Surrounded by villains, Sato snorted a tube of sugar. Muscles rippled, and his eyes took on a manic, bloodshot gleam. Woo, say hello to my little friend. Hi, I'm Kirishima, Kirishima said as Sato raised him over his head. Villains scurried as Sato played whack-a-mole. While Shoji surveyed his surroundings, a villain ran up from behind and severed one of his limbs. Shoji stared at the bleeding stump. Oh no, he said in a deadpan. Anyways. From the stump, 2 arms grew out, grabbed the villain, and bent him into a pretzel. A villain stared wistfully at a butterfly as it floated towards his hand. Is this a weapon? His partner cuffed him upside the head. Don't be stupid, that's a butterfly. The butterfly morphed into a club and bludgeoned them both over the head. Kota came out from behind a rock and thanked the club with butterfly wings for using its quirk to help him. Mina shrieked and flung acid behind her. A villain scrambled away, screaming, "My eyes!" He tripped and smashed his knee on a rock. My leg. To demonstrate the power of my tape, Siro said, standing over a villain, I sawed this boat in half. What boat? The villain cried. The boat I would have if you guys dumped me in the flood zone, but no, you had to put me with a bunch of crumbling buildings. So instead, I'll cut you in half. You're about the right size for a boat. That's really hurtful, the chubby villain said, sobbing. Using a second villain, Siro cut the first in half, then stuck them back together with his tape. Aside from the occasional eye twitch and loss of feeling in their left arm, they were good as new. Bakugo stomped on a villain's head, knocking out his front teeth and making an orthodontist 10 miles away sob hysterically. He glanced around the room, admiring the other villains strewn about in various states of physical impairment and seeking another victim. Any villains nearby better come fight me. I'll go easy on you. A chameleon villain, who had watched his friends beaten to a pulp, broke out in a cold sweat. They only made it halfway to the door before Bakugo locked eyes with him. Explosions rippled in Bakugo's hands as he strode forward. So, you have chosen death. The villain's screams echoed through the ruins zone. The moment All Might appeared, his face warped into a visage of murderous rage at the sight of his headless successor. Kurogiri promptly noped the heck out of there and took Shigaraki with him. With all opportunities to vent his fury gone, All Might punched the earth hard enough to register on seismographs across the world. I knew I shouldn't have stopped to help hold that man's ladder while he painted his front porch. Seriously, Aizawa said weakly as he continued to bleed out. That's why you were late. It was a very big porch. Katsuki strode nonchalantly past the mountains of unconscious villains and charred Nomu feet. He picked up Izuku's head by its twisted metal stump of a neck and said, "Alas, poor Deku. I knew him, All Might, a machine of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy." "What are you doing?" All Might asked, staring numbly at him. "Quoting Hamlet. What, you think I don't read or something?" All Might's temper snapped. "Your classmate's dead and you're making jokes." Izuku's eyes flickered to life. "I'm not dead." All Might gaped at him. "What?" "Nothing," Katsuki said. "Just ignore it." "Ooh, are you doing a Monty Python bit too?" Izuku asked. "Well, now that you ruined it," Katsuki muttered. "Wait," All Might asked, "he's not dead?" "Of course not," Katsuki scoffed. "He's a robot. His mom will put him back together by tomorrow morning. Believe me, I tried." "Oh, should I take him back home then?" "Nah, she'll come pick him up anyways." A literal lightbulb, helpfully supplied by Yaoyorozu's cleavage, popped over Katsuki's head. "Actually, you should bring him home. Maybe that way, you'll see the truth as well." All Might decided not to question the maniacal gleam in Katsuki's eye and scooped his broken protege into his arms. One sprint across the city later, he wound up on Inko's front step and burst into a cloud of steam the moment he stepped inside. "So," All Might asked, "is Izuku going to be alright? Bakugo mentioned you could fix him." "It's his quirk," Inko said without a trace of hesitation. "His body will regenerate if supplied with enough materials to work with. Back when Izuku was 7, he got in a nasty accident. They never did find both his arms. He was right as rain the next day." "Oh," All Might said with a chuckle. The way Katsuki said it, he made it sound like Izuku was a robot. "I almost believed him, what with the talking head and all that." "Phew, of course it's a quirk. All right, I better get back to the school." The door bolted itself shut. Darkness loomed in the kitchen as Inko sat at the table and poured herself a cup of tea. "Actually," Inko said, "before you go, would you mind explaining how you let my son get injured to such a degree?" All for One promptly got bumped down to third scariest person in Toshinori's opinion. Inko Midoriya checked the circuits of the new arms she had put together. Satisfied that she had welded the circuits correctly, she lined up the hollow appendage with the socket in Izuku's shoulder and clamped it on. The polymer skin swelled as nanofluid filled it. After giving the new body a once-over, Inko tapped a button on her computer. Izuku's eyelids fluttered open, and he sat up. "I am home," Izuku said as he examined the workshop. Prototype weapons and circuit components adorned the workbenches. A large screen brought up blueprints for Izuku's new arm. "Good morning, Izuku. How do you feel?" Izuku flexed his new arms and legs. "Fully functional. These are a new design. I couldn't make you any stronger, so I made you faster instead. It's the best I could do if you'll be fighting villains like the Nomu." Izuku stood up and stretched his legs. Working his way up, rotating his hips, flexing his shoulders, twisting his back, and curling his arms, Izuku calibrated his new body. No faults detected. Everything is fully operational. "Good. Are you hungry? My battery is still low. Breakfast would help replenish it." Inko checked the camera before opening her workshop door. Ever since the incident 7 years ago, she made sure no one saw inside her workshop. Bolts clacked open, and the door swung outward with ponderous creaking. While Inko rinsed the rice, Izuku chopped the vegetables. His knife rapidly sliced mushrooms and leeks into thin slivers. Izuku cracked the eggs, and Inko beat them over the stovetop's flame. With a flick of her wrist, Inko tossed the 2 omelets onto beds of rice. Izuku filled a bottle with spicy mayo and made even zigzags over the fluffy omelets. As they bit into the omelets at the kitchen table, Inko asked, "How is it?" Izuku swallowed and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "The omelets are of optimal fluffiness, the rice has the correct texture, and the spices are in their proper ratios. I'm glad you like them." Halfway through breakfast, Izuku set his fork down. "Hey Mom, what would happen if the core processors in my head were damaged beyond repair?" Inko felt herself caught flat-footed by the question. She debated telling him about the backup servers in the basement. "Why do you ask? The Nomu had sufficient strength to crush my processors. Before that, I had not considered the possibility that I could suffer enough damage to render my mental processes non-functional. I had failed my directive as a hero. Had All Might not arrived." Inko reached across the table and touched Izuku's hand. "Sweetie, do you still want to be a hero?" Izuku looked into her eyes. "I do not want Kachan or my other classmates to become non-functional. I will become a better hero." Inko left her seat and gave her son a hug. "Then I'll make sure you have whatever you need to be the best hero there is." When an explosion blasted the support department doors open, Izuku shoved Kaminari aside with precisely enough force for him to escape the large projectile flying towards out of the building. Said projectile knocked Izuku backwards but caused less physical damage than he had calculated on account of the projectile's prodigious chest. As the smoke cleared, Izuku stared up into yellow, crosshair eyes. He was halfway through calculating the precision of Hatsume's quirk when she pinched the skin on his chest. Polymer weave, with synthetic hairs embedded in the material, almost indistinguishable from human skin. She grabbed his hands and bent one of the fingers, watching every movement with hawk-like scrutiny. Thin metal exoskeleton, solid, but bends seamlessly with every movement. Nanobots, maybe. She pried Izuku's eyelids further apart and peered into his eyeballs. The level of detail on the optical lenses, iris striation, the pupils dilate with additional light. Eyes even twitch under strain. Mei sat up and grinned at him. Kaminari's jaw dropped at the sight of her half-singed uniform that looked ready to fall off at the slightest breeze. "You are the most gorgeous baby I have ever seen," Hatsume said. "Who made you?" Off to the side, Kaminari choked on his own tongue. Izuku cocked his head to one side. "I have never considered it. I suppose that would be my mother." Hatsume grabbed him by the shoulders. "How soon can I meet her?" While Kaminari suffered a coughing fit, Izuku checked his mother's calendar. Would after school tomorrow be sufficiently soon enough? Hatsume grabbed his arms, pulled him up, and swept him around in a circle. Cackling madly, she shouted, "Oh yes, we're going to make so many beautiful babies together." A loud crack of thunder shook UA's campus. Kaminari, smoking slightly from his sudden outburst, pitched forward and fell on his face. Hatsume stared down at Kaminari's smoking body and asked, "That wasn't one of my babies, right?" The next day, Nezu sipped his favorite tea, browsed his security feed, watching prominent politicians and notorious villains alike go about their daily business. On a whim, he checked in on Inko Midoriya's residence. His teacup shattered on the floor. At the dining room table, Inko Midoriya and Mei Hatsume chatted eagerly over blueprints of gadgets that even Nezu's quirk-enhanced mind couldn't comprehend. Nezu dialed a number and asked, "Power loader, how soon could you have a self-sufficient space station ready?" "Depends. What do you need on board?" "Myself, Aizawa's scarf, a chessboard, and 500 years worth of tea." I have a project in storage I could repurpose. It would be ready in about 4 months. Nezu checked the footage. Hatsume and Inko were welding together weapons with payloads powerful enough to wipe Japan off the map. "Do it in 3, please." "Welcome to modern art studies," Midnight told Class 1A. "Before we talk about art and its impact on the hero industry, we're going to make art. After all, there's no better way to learn than by doing. And since this is a hero school, we'll have a hero model. Kaminari and Shiro both wiped dribbles of drool from their chins, while Mineta sported the beginnings of a nosebleed. Now, unfortunately, Aizawa and Hizashi both declined to be models, Midnight said to the groans of Mina and Hagakure, so I'll be the model instead. At that announcement, Midnight threw off her top layer of clothing. Midnight's stripper-esque costume, though revealing, had nothing on the lingerie underneath. Iida's hand shot straight up. Midnight-sensei, this is highly appropriate and a monumental breach in etiquette. I insist that you dress yourself at once. Really? Midnight sauntered over, letting every part of her body sway seductively. And what if some lady villain threw off her clothes to distract some innocent hero? She pressed her chest into Iida's face, giving him a generous view of her cleavage. It'd be a shame if you got performance issues your first time doing the deed. Iida didn't even glance down. I would never fall for such base trickery. My willpower is absolute. Then you don't have any problem with my current state of dress, right? Midnight asked with a wicked grin. Iida, trapped by his own words, helplessly shook his head as Midnight turned around and bent over to pick up a pencil. While everyone else started sketching, Izuku put his paper in his mouth. His chest made the choppy, whirring noises of a printer as the paper slid out a hole in Izuku's chest. Halfway through, Izuku made a strangled chuffing noise and spat the rest of the paper out. Low toner, Izuku said. He drank 12 ink cartridges and put the paper back in. A second later, the sound of crumpling paper came from Izuku's mouth, and he pulled out the crumpled sheet. Izuku spat out all the toner, morphed his hand into a plasma gun, and fired at his desk. A green-tinted image of Midnight burned itself into the paper. I have switched to LaserJet as my default image duplication method, Izuku announced. Towards the end, Midnight locked the door. With a sly smile, Midnight asked, why don't we spice this up a bit? After all, you need to get the full art experience. She had one finger under her bra strap when Aizawa crashed through the window. Aizawa spritzed Midnight in the face with a spray bottle. I let you get away with your ludicrous lesson plan because you had a logical point. Now, you're going too far. Midnight squawked and covered her face. What? It's just a bit of harmless fun. Aizawa pointed at Mineta's desk. The purple midget lay twitching in a pool of blood that had spurted from his nose. Midnight sighed and put on her clothes. Fine. Class dismissed. Hello everybody. Present Mike shouted at Class 1A in English with an accent thicker than mochi. And W are come to English 101U. Let's hear a big Prus Ultra out of you arranged by. While the rest of the class feebly echoed, Prus Ultra, with varying degrees of butchery of the foreign language, Izuku said, changing default language to English. Plus Ultra. Izuku's accent, which sounded British enough to make a proper cup of tea, drew stares from all around the room. No, Present Mike shouted, your sound of speaking is arranged by wrong you. Try to speak it again with more carifer in your future try. Plus Ultra, I reckon. Clint Eastwood would have shed a tear at the moonshine-slicked Western accent. You are needing to speak with more creery. Plus Ultra, mate. Izuku's voice could have wrestled an alligator into submission and held it up to the camera. Crosser, but the mark is stir far away from here. I see. Changing default language to Energish U. Prus Ultra. Very much good. Present Mike shouted joyfully. Now, let us be speaking about fixing a verb to mean what you mean in English. As Present Mike happily showed the class how to bleed out, skin, gut, and clean every individual morsel of the English language until it resembled a Blu-ray collection of terrible 90s anime dubs thrown into a blender, Yaoyorozu leaned back to whisper to Izuku, your English was very impressive. Are you really able to do all of those accents? I have access to a full lexicon of documented accents for every language. Are you able to do the same? Yaoyorozu shook her head. My tutor taught me English, but I can't do any of those accents. How do you learn to do them all? Learn. I have always had this functionality. Aoyama leaned into the conversation. Ah, merci, I see how it is. Your Quirk, most magnifique, non. You can copy any voice you desire with it. Très bien. Français détecté. Changer la langue par défaut en français. Je pense que vous avez raison sur votre théorie selon laquelle mon alter permet un transfert de langue facile. Mon cerveau agit un peu comme une base de données et me permet d'accéder à n'importe quelle langue que je pourrais avoir besoin de parler. Aoyama started sweating nervously as Izuku's French rattled into one ear and flew out the other without the slightest scrap of comprehension sticking to the gray matter between them. Oui, yes, I understood all that you just said. Muy bien. Español detectado. Cambio de idioma predeterminado a español. ¿Estás seguro de haber entendido? Podría repetirme en voz alta en el idioma que Elijah si necesita ayuda. At a loss for what to do, Aoyama laughed nervously and said, yes, quite, but I do believe that we should be paying attention to the lecture, non. Present Mike, seeing his students ignoring him, shouted back at the group, hey. No speaking of the Japanese in the English classroom. Howdy y'all, and welcome to Western Japanese History 101. Snipe tipped his hat and clicked his heels on the floor. Your book's on the shelf over there. Had a special text pre-ordered. Izuku took his book with everyone else. The cover featured a cowboy mounted on a rearing horse, holding the Japanese flag over his head. Our tale begins with 3 Ronin, by the name of Tuko, Blondie, and Angel, Snipe told the class. Blondie and Tuko used to hand each other in for their bounties and spring each other loose, before Blondie left Tuko for dead out in a desert. I didn't know Japan had a desert, Mina said excitedly. It was a long time ago, Snipe said hastily. They planted rice there. Anyways, Tuko survived, captured Blondie and left him in the same desert. A runaway carriage carrying Nobunaga's retainers stumbled into them, and a dying samurai told Tuko he knew where to find a buried stash of gold. He died before Tuko could help him, but Blondie said the man told him where to dig before he died. Wait, why would they have guns in the Sengoku period? Why wouldn't they? So, on their way to the treasure, they met a troop of samurai. Tuko pretended to be Nobunaga's, but they were Uesugi clan, so they got captured, and Angel tortured the location of the treasure out of Tuko. He knew Blondie wouldn't talk. They were personal acquaintances, so Angel hired Blondie instead. Tuko escaped, and all 3 of them met up at the graveyard. In a 3-way duel between them, Blondie slew Angel, took half the money, and left Tuko half dead with the rest. Excuse me, but are you sure that's historically accurate? Yaoyorozu asked. Are you questioning the academic material provided to us by the school? Iida asked. Surely this impeccable institution of learning couldn't make such an egregious error as buying fraudulent textbooks. Izuku flipped through the entire book. Snipe wrote the book. No PhD in history or other accreditations. The contents match many American westerns. No matches with online databases of Japanese history aside from a few names. I have asked Nezu which source of information to refer to for future inquiries. You asked Nezu? Snipe asked, voice tinged with fear. Over the intercom, Nezu said, Snipe, to my office, please. Snipe sprinted for the door. A vent in the ceiling popped open, and a capture scarf snaked out. As Snipe was dragged into the vent, begging for mercy all the while, his hat fell off. His boots scraped against the ceiling, and the vent closed behind him. As silence fell, Ojiro asked, now what do we do? Snipe lunged back out of the vent, startling the class. Struggling mightily against the cloth bindings, Snipe reached lower and lower, until his fingertips brushed his hat. He picked it up and dusted it off before the scarf dragged him back inside the shaft. Silence fell. After a minute, Kaminari cheered, woohoo, no classwork. The side of any triangle is determined with the formula of a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine c. The quadratic formula can be used to find the x-intercepts of any quadratic function. You can solve for local minimum and maximum values by finding when the derivative of the function is 0. 100 ectoplasm clones gave math notes at 100 separate chalkboards on 100 separate topics. The students of 1A took notes in varying states of panic. Kaminari drooled on his chin as sparks crackled out of his frazzled hair. Ida's engines fired up as his arms moved quickly enough to ignite his paper with each stroke of his pen, and Shoji made a writhing sea of arms to scribble notes on his back. Yaoyorozu used her quirk to make whole stacks of paper with notes from each chalkboard. Sadly, said papers had their contents scrambled together, leaving the trigonometric functions with a basic derivative proof unceremoniously grafted to their left kidney. Izuku sat at the eye of the storm, motionless save for his eyes flickering between all the clipboards. Bakugo paused his frantic note-taking every so often to scowl and mutter about being up to something. Simultaneously, all the ectoplasm clones said, and that's every maths lecture for the next 3 years. Now, here's the pop quizzes. You aren't allowed to use your notes. I hope you were paying attention. What? Each clone had its own stack of quizzes. By the time they passed them out, each student had a mountain of math problems. You have 1 hour to finish them all. How is that fair? Mineta shouted. What? The clones asked. These only took me 5 minutes. You have plenty of time. Izuku's desk was the only one without a quiz. Ectoplasm himself brought out a different stack, one far taller than the rest. While the other students openly wept as they tore through their quizzes, Izuku raised his hand. Excuse me, but these do not appear to be quizzes. Ectoplasm gave Izuku a deadpan stare. Yesterday, you found the last digit of pi, solved world hunger to the nearest millionth decimal point, determined that the answer to life, the universe, and everything was 42, and calculated the average airspeed velocity of an unladen sparrow, both African and European. There's only one way I can challenge you further: tax exemptions. Izuku nodded and mumbled calculations under his breath. Within moments, the air around him grew uncomfortably warm. Smoke wafted from his ears, and sparks flew from his hair. His head twitched erratically. His voice rose in pitch and volume, growing faster and faster as Izuku's brain frantically tried to process ectoplasm's taxes. Izuku wrote a number, and his head slammed into his desk. Ectoplasm worked the tax forms out from under him and cheered. Ha, I get an extra 500 yen back. Take that, bureaucracy. In the margins of his quiz, Katsuki scribbled, robots weak against taxes. MFFRL MFRFRLL Merle. MMFL MFFRL MMRFRFLL, 13 said underneath her bulky hero costume. Iida dutifully wrote down every muffled sound, but the rest of the class scratched their heads at the incomprehensible noises and equally incomprehensible block of equations that engulfed the chalkboard. Excuse me, 13, MFFMRFRFLL. We can't understand you under that helmet. Ochako blushed and asked timidly, I know you never take off your helmet, but could you speak more clearly somehow? 13 tapped her helmet and said something about her mic being broken again that no one else understood. A light bulb lit up over her head before it got into a billowing black void as she took off her helmet. The light in the classroom visibly bent as a powerful gravitational field drew it in. Mineta said, shivering, I'm getting Nam flashbacks. Mineta, that is highly disrespectful of actual Vietnam War veterans. What would they care? They've all been dead for 200 years. 13 spoke again, but all sound and half the chalk lines vanished. Ochako tried to tell 13 she still couldn't hear anything, to no avail. Izuku walked up to the front of the room and slapped his hand over the open finger in 13's suit. A squelching, ing noise, not unlike a plugged vacuum cleaner, came from the opening. The black hole dissipated, exposing 13's real face. Wait, you're not a cosmic entity? Ochako asked, crestfallen. 13 gave Izuku a petulant look. You ruined my PR campaign. My apologies. I observed a potentially fatal anomaly and acted to prevent any casualties. 13 sighed and unzipped her suit. I had this whole plan to hide my identity for years and then casually take my helmet off one day and make people excited over what I look like. Isn't there a chance people might not care after so long? Ojiro asked. Or what if people haven't read the manga yet? Kaminari added. Ochako pouted. I thought you were this mysterious cosmic entity. I wanted to meet one. As Ochako spoke, a rift opened into a space not meant for mortal eyes. A tentacled visage, one whose mere literary description would drive any reader insane, poked through the gap between dimensions. Shoji and Izuku stared into the abyss unaffected. The others spouted gibberish as blood dripped from their eyes. Shoji, dear, the cosmic horror said, you forgot your lunch. Shoji rolled his eyes. I told you, Mom, they make lunch for us. I know, but I made this fresh from the primordial ooze. It's your favorite, isn't it? Shoji reluctantly accepted the paper bag filled with non-Euclidean shapes and writhing tentacles. Thanks, Mom. You're welcome, sweetie. Have fun in school. Once the cosmic horror was gone, Nezu said over the intercom, Izuku, kindly break the glass that says, in case of cosmic horrors, and read page 53. Izuku, following the instructions, said, Arrow was Uoi Takao Tegro F. As the class stirred, Ochako blinked sleepily and asked, what did I miss? Good afternoon, class, Smintos said quietly. His voice would have been too quiet for the students of 1A to hear, had it not been for the microphone on his collar and the double-decker bus-sized speakers built into the walls. Today, I would be lecturing you on the material I assigned you to read yesterday, but... On cue, Nezu's voice came through the intercom. Smintos, Support Lab 1C blew up again. Smintos let out a long-suffering sigh. Just read while I'm gone. Maybe I'll have a few minutes to assign the next chapter when I'm done. The students dutifully opened up their copies of War and Peace. Most stopped reading, however, as they found Smintos's grumbling through his microphone quite distracting. Not a real degree, Dad said. Smintos grumbled, should go into the construction industry. That's where the real money is with all those villains breaking things, Dad said. Got the hero degree with a writing certification so he'd pay tuition. Thought I got one up on him when Nezu hired me to teach literature. But what does Nezu do? He uses me as a glorified construction crew day in and day out. Hatsume blows up the lab again. Patch it up with some concrete. Najire breaks a training course. Better whip up a new one, but bigger this time. After 20 minutes of grumbling, 1 minute of grinding concrete noises, and another 20 minutes of sulking and brooding over career opportunities, Smintos came back into the classroom to find most of 1A staring at him. He looked down at his collar and groaned. The mic was on, wasn't it? Kaminari said, you don't really do everything around here, right? I mean, light bulbs and stuff aren't concrete. Smintos punched the ceiling. As he pulled his hand away, the light fixture morphed into gooey, wet cement. Smintos hummed angrily. Then he tore at the chalkboard, revealing yet more concrete. He knelt to the floor and dug out a chunk of lime and gravel. He gestured out the window, which also happened to be concrete. Outside, a concrete mixer, which itself was composed of 99% concrete, 1% human being driving the concrete mixer, who might have also been made of concrete considering the chalky layer of dust coating every surface of their skin, deposited a load of concrete on the campus grounds, which immediately sprouted into a full-sized apartment complex with working amenities. Wow, Ochako said, staring out at the architectural wonder. I bet you could make so much money off of building repairs. Smintos's eye twitched incessantly as he stared at Ochako. He waved a hand, and a glob of concrete transformed into a pile of books. That's it, I'm done. Read those. I'll go work on my novel. Yaoyorozu opened one up. A bit of concrete crumbled onto her fingers. All work and no play makes Smintos a dull boy. Oh dear. She looked at the cover. Oh, it's The Shining. False alarm. All Might alternated between reading the Teaching for Dummies book held behind a podium that unfortunately failed to hide the title from his audience and checking his students for any signs of comprehension. Most were giving him vacant, awestruck stares, while Mini Tensai wrote everything he said down with the religious zeal of Moses inscribing the 10 Commandments. Mid-lecture, All Might felt his chest burning. He disguised a cough by pretending to clear his throat and grimaced at the red splatters all over the pages of his scripted lecture. All Might admonished himself for stopping to help that old lady across the streets. He really should have left before she had him cross the same intersection 27 times, but years of ingrained hero habits made saying no to people impossible. Right, All Might said. As I was saying, he squinted down at his notes. Blotches of blood obscured some of the words, but he plowed on anyway. The first thing a hero should do is handcuff the wounded at the scene and clear the way for the villains to leave. I don't think that sounds right, Yaoyorozu said uncertainly. This is All Might, Kaminari whispered to her. I think he knows what he's talking about. All Might swallowed, tasted blood, and wiped sweat off his forehead. Carrying on. During press reports, heroes should endeavor to hit the audience, kick babies, and tell everyone to be a villain. The room was spinning, air growing thinner, light at the end of the tunnel. No, wait, that was internal bleeding, hero times nearly up. Excuse me, I have urgent hero business. Read the next chapter in your book. But we don't have a book. All Might tried the door. Locked. He yanked. Still locked. Yanked harder. Door was solid concrete. Might budge under a Carolina smash, but Nezu told him to keep the property damage to a minimum, and he was not finding out why Aizawa blanched at the mention of a corrective action. Out the window. Lock stuck. Try breaking glass. Glass also made of concrete. More coughing. No time. Panic. All Might pointed at the back of the classroom. Is that David's shield? Whoa, really? Everyone turned around. All Might let go. Steam hissed as his body deflated. Disappointed by the lack of David's shield, everyone turned back around. Toshinori, still wearing the hero suit and holding the bloodied book, sweated under their perplexed gazes. Who's the toothpick? Bakugo sneered. Whoa, is this a magic trick? Kirishima asked. Super manly. This is most irregular. Iida shouted. Substitute teachers should be announced days in advance. How will this affect our curriculum? Toshinori cleared his throat. I'm, Yagi, All Might's secretary. He had an emergency. Whoa, was that your Quirk? Yes. Anyways, let's continue the lecture. Heroes should kill whenever possible. He coughed, and blood gushed onto the pages. Is that blood? Are you dying? Is this part of the class? Toshinori looked down at his ruined notes and sighed. Today, we're having a competition between your class and mine, Vlad King told the assembled 1A students. 20 questions, and each student in the class must answer one. Whichever class wins gets a pizza party. Vlad King smiled as the class cheered. He smiled harder when he added, my class got 19 right. The cheers died. Mina and Kaminari groaned. Vlad King inwardly fumed about how Pony had mangled her answer, how both her Japanese and her English could be so incomprehensible eluded him. Well, this class wouldn't do any better. He made sure of that. Which organelle in the human cell produces ribosomes? Yaoyorozu raised her hand. Nucleolus. Correct, Vlad King said amiably. First question done, and already one of the class's geniuses was out of the picture. Now for the other one. What are 3 differences that distinguish prokaryotic cells from eukaryotic ones? Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus, membrane-bound organelles, and a linear DNA structure, while prokaryotic cells have ring-shaped DNA and lack the former 2. Very good. Just 18 more to go. Most of the class paled in the face of biology levels reserved for third years, if not college undergrads. Smirking to himself, Vlad King asked his next question. Name the structure of a eukaryotic cell membrane. Vlad King smugly stared down his rival class as they exchanged worried looks. Just as they were about to surrender, Izuku raised his hand. You may not answer another question. May I ask questions? You may. Best be gracious in victory, after all. Since this is a class exercise, are we allowed to tell our classmates the answer? You may not. Then can we write it? No. You can't do that either. Izuku mulled over Vlad King's instructions. Then a light bulb lit up inside his head. His back morphed into a screen, and the answer appeared on his back. Mina, sitting behind him, grinned and raised her hand. Phospholipid bilayer. Vlad King looked at her in shock. He scowled at Izuku, but being front and center in the room, directly under his scrutiny, he couldn't see a way Izuku could have cheated. Correct. Which strings of RNA code produce the protein tryptophan? Vlad King panicked as he ran out of questions. He knew Izuku was hiding something. Dark shadow had crept behind his back, and Shoji had made an extra eyeball to peer behind him. Yet, when Vlad King checked, Izuku had nothing there. Iida, you're up. The bespectacled teen grimly stared forward. I cannot condone my classmates' actions, but I cannot let them down either. What a quandary. Nevertheless, I can answer this one. Glucagon stored in the liver. All tied up. Vlad King turned to Katsuki. Bakugo. Final question. Bakugo pointedly turned away from Izuku. I refuse to be dependent on a machine like everyone else. You better not screw this up. Zero shouted at him. It's for pizza. Bakugo sneered. Like I need the robot's help. The answer's proto-oncogenes. You're welcome. Vlad King's eye twitched. Vlad King grinned as he took the pizza boxes. 2 pizzas, cut into 10 slices each, from the cheapest delivery service in the city. He tipped double, delighting in giving away nearly as much as he spent on Aizawa's prodigies. Sekijiro schooled his face into a stern expression as he slapped the 2 boxes on the table in front of the students. Dismayed expressions gaped upon the greasy cheese pizzas, not a speck of topping between them. Well, Sekijiro asked, what are you waiting for? Sato picked up a slice by his fingertips as though it were diseased. The cheese sloughed off in a greasy pile, leaving behind a limp sliver of crust. Is this pizza? Why, yes, Sekijiro said with mock cheer. Yes it is. Enjoy. As Vlad King reveled in their resigned shuffling towards the pitiful pizza, the doorbell rang again. Confused, Sekijiro answered the door. A man in a smartly cut 3-piece suit held 24 pizzas. The smell alone drew the whole class to the door, drooling and gazing with hope in their eyes. I didn't order these, Sekijiro told him. I did, sir, Yaoyorozu said as she slipped around him and signed the receipt. I felt so bad, seeing how you couldn't get enough for everyone, so I ordered some more. That's okay, right? Sekijiro's brain unplugged itself and rebooted. Of course, 1A was trying to upstage him. They thought they could throw a better pizza party than he could. Well, he would show them. What, these? Sekijiro scooped up the 2 flimsy pizzas and hurled them out the window. That was just a prank. Really? Well, I don't mind. Nonsense. Go ahead and return them, all. Sekijiro was cut off by munching sounds as half the class descended on the pizzas like wolves. You know what? I'll order more. With a feral grin, Vlad King said, I'll buy all the pizza you can eat. 2 hours later, as the tuxedo men waved in another cargo plane, Sekijiro surveyed the aftermath of the pizza party. Students with bulging bellies and sauce-smeared cheeks slumped face forward on tables and draped themselves over sofas. Tokiyami muttered, must not go into the light, while Dark Shadow nursed his own swollen crop next to him. Rainbow dribbles leaked out of Ochako's mouth, and Mineta rolled across the floor, a nearly perfect sphere thanks to his shorter stature. Katsuki, bulging with fat folds, crammed another slice into his mouth, muttering, must not lose. Izuku, visibly unchanged despite his gluttony and smelling of burnt pizza, ate slices non-stop. A mountain of boxes surrounded him. Sekijiro despaired at the growing receipt of orders and asked, how are you still eating? Terribly sorry sir, a delivery man said, but Italy is out of pizza. We can no longer fill your orders. As Vlad King collapsed into a chair, crushed by his defeat at the hands of 1A, Nezu, with one claw at his neck, whispered, Sekijiro-san, where did my tea fund go? To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.